Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Normal America Show this Monday, January 16th, 2023, Martin Luther King Day. Hope everyone's having a fantastic day. I know I am. I had a great weekend. Glad to be here with you all. So this is going to be, as every Monday, the Rob Rewind, looking back at a previous show that I'd done, debate, conversation, panel, or sometimes even just a show I did on my own. So I hope you all enjoy this. Today will be the third part in reviewing debates that I've done with left-wing streamer Destiny. I did the first two. The second one I didn't really care to do. I just had an extra day, so I did it. But the first one I thought was really important because we talked about COVID. And that was 2.5 years ago, so I thought it would be interesting to see how our predictions went. I think I did very well in that discussion. And then this one I thought was important because this was from November 30th, 2021, so over a year ago, on the record of Joe Biden. And now we have another year of the Biden administration under our belt. And I thought it would be interesting to see how some of the discussions went about this particular topic now that we know a little more about the Biden administration. So a lot going on in the news today. We still got the Biden scandal with, what is this? Go away. Just 1 second. Jeez. But, just interesting stuff. What would I think about a debate or conversation with Curtis Yarvin? I know little about him, but I would be open to it. From what I've seen, I've liked. I would absolutely be down with the conversation. So, if you have any connections to him, I would absolutely talk to him on the channel. So, I don't have a problem at all with that. I think that'd be fun. It was an interesting weekend. We'll stall here for a couple people to get on for 5-10 minutes. What did I have going on this weekend? A lot of family stuff, which was very nice. I very much enjoyed it. The last you saw me, I was doing Drunken Debates Friday. I was hosting it. I did a little show Saturday morning as well. So yesterday was all about house cleaning, and we got visitors coming in for my son's big birthday party. He did turn 2 on January 9th, but the big party, the venue we had for the party, couldn't really get that party in until here this weekend. So doing a lot of preparation for that. I think he's going to have a lot of fun. I'm very excited about that. So people chirping me here on the phone. So I am going to try to have a conversation with Pisco here coming up hopefully Wednesday, if our schedules permit, both of our schedules, surrounding Joe Biden's mishandling of classified information, what I consider a double standard around the media, the special counsel that's been appointed to look into that. It's just hilarious to watch all of these people that said, they didn't just say that, Trump didn't comply with subpoenas. It was jeopardizing national security. How careless. Biden himself said it. And now that we see the story gets worse and worse with Biden, today what we learned was in his garage where his Corvette was, so it was very secure, where classified information was, where apparently his son, Hunter, who had business dealings with, this isn't my words, this is Hunter's words, the spy master of China. His son was claiming to live in this location, possibly paying $40,000 a month rent there. I haven't been able to confirm that story. But you would say, geez, that doesn't sound very secure. Someone's garage, classified information. If it is very serious, as we were told when Trump had classified information, then can we see who was there? Because we know Trump's house, they had surveillance, Secret Service was there, they had logs of people that came and went. And apparently the Biden administration, despite the fact that the Secret Service is there, is claiming that there was no visitor log from the Wilmington home where classified information was improperly stored. Now, all the people that talked about possible nuclear secrets or troop locations and this and that and the other with Trump, and my goodness, it was so devastating. Where are they now? literally, when you look at some of the bigger blue checkmark, like bigger voices like Robnoerr or, there was the Mueller guy, she wrote, it's a big left-wing Twitter. They've literally just defaulted to, well, Trump's a criminal and Biden's not. And this, of course, is the left-wing ideology in a nutshell. We're good people, you're bad people, so if we do the same thing as you, it's okay, because we're good. It's the same thing you saw with quid pro quos. Biden admitted to a quid pro quo to fire a prosecutor that was looking into his son. That's okay. We know he's a good guy, so he didn't do it for personal reasons. Trump allegedly does a quid pro quo to look into that, and, that's just because it was for personal reasons, and we know Trump's intent was because he's a corrupt, evil person. Always the same story. Always. What's up, Tickle the Selmo and Sweet Tet? Thank you so much for checking me out on Rumble. Rumble is the place that I would prefer people watching me on right now. But we're going to get started. Now, unfortunately, Twitch is sort of the bigger platform that I stream on. I have the most viewers there. I'm trying to encourage people to leave YouTube and Twitch, which is one of the reasons that I'm pushing Rumble so hard. I'm also on comfy.stream, that you can find me there as well. Both Rumble and Comfy are free speech platforms, so you don't have to worry about the things you're saying there. But it does mean that I'm going to have less people viewing me in the interim, but I think it's important to try to bring people over there. As I mentioned at the onset, this debate will be the third debate that I'm looking at with me and left-wing streamer Destiny. One of the reasons I'm doing this is because Destiny has blue hair now. I did not know that. People tell me all the time they like when I do debates. The problem is the caliber of people that I have the opportunity to debate is oftentimes sorely lacking. And there are people on the left that at least are competent enough to have a discussion, even if I massively disagree with them. I think Destiny's one of the better debaters on the left. No, I don't mean Cozy. Comfy.stream. Cozy is the Groypers. I am not on with the Groypers. It's comfy.stream. If you go there, it's a free speech platform that was made by the host of The Crucible, Andrew Wilson. It's an up-and-coming platform, so I'm happy to be up there. Thank you, Dill. Thanks for heading over to Rumble. And I'll try to be periodically checking that Rumble chat as well. Anyways, the truth is, most of the big left-wing streamers don't want to debate me. And that's the truth of Destiny as well, because you can see in the interactions I've already had with him, it's not an easy task for him to debate me, because not only am I a good debater, but my positions are correct. And so it makes it difficult for him to debate me, and these big left-wing streamers don't have anything to gain by me coming in and making their life very difficult, not because I'm rude or a jerk, as you'll see in this debate, but because it's difficult for them to keep up with, and they don't want to appear as if they're losing debates over and over to a right-winger on their platform, so they ignore me. And the offer has been brokered through several moderators, through myself, to try to get some of these bigger left-wing streamers, Destiny being one of them, to have conversations. They're uninterested. Now, Destiny was more than happy to moderate a discussion I had with Pisco a couple months ago, which basically became a 2-on-1, me debating Pisco and Destiny, which is fine. I didn't mind it. He has time for that, but not time to debate me on these issues. So maybe we'll talk to Destiny and we'll be able to do another debate on Biden's record a year later to see how it goes. But I thought it'd be interesting. The other thing is the cope that many of his supporters, and I understand this is just the nature of things. If you support a streamer who's a debater or into politics, you probably like them best. So Destiny's certainly, I might be a better political mind than Destiny and a better debater, but Destiny's certainly a better streamer. He has, you can't deny that. He's made a career of it. He has tons of viewers, and that's perfectly fine. I respect his ability to bring in an audience. I think he's done a great job with that, and I'm not going to crap on that at all. But when you see that audience, the things they say about me, everything he says is just a conspiracy theory. It's not true. He constantly says something, and then when he's proven wrong, he flounders to something else. So, given that, I thought, all right, if that's what we hear all the time, let's review these debates and see if that's the case. And you can go back last week and watch the first two debates I had with him and make your own mind up. But I think this debate, I really hit my stride. The other thing to say about this is, excuse me. This was on Politically Provoked, which was moderated by Brittany from Politically Provoked. Notice how little moderation is needed. And that's one of the reasons that I did enjoy debating Destiny. Most of the time, we could have a debate and it doesn't require moderation. We're letting each other talk. We're letting each other address the topics that we want. Where if someone asks for evidence, we're trying to present it in a timely manner. So I was happy with the direction this debate went on that level of it as well. So I haven't watched this debate since it happened. So we're just going to dive in. One thing I want to do real quick. Actually, so give me a second. And we'll dive right into the debate here. But if you're just joining me or if you're watching this in retrospect, I would love to debate a college professor on the Russia collusion stuff. If you're a new viewer, I think that I'm one of the best debaters that's on the online sphere. This debate occurred November 30th, 2021, so it's over a year old. And that's why I wanted to do this and the COVID one, and COVID's brought up in this, because I wanted to see. There were predictions made, there were claims made by both of us. Let's see how things played out. And I'm not going to say I was right about everything, but we'll see. We'll see who was better on this. So if you're a new viewer, if you're watching this at a later date, please consider following me. I try to do these debates a lot. On Fridays, I host Drunken Debates, where I'm either a debater or a moderator every Friday night on a panel. So, yeah. Hopefully you enjoy this. All right, let's do it. Let's hope I started at the right part.
About the topic and your stance. After that, we'll open up the floor for those watching. If you have questions, tag Politically Provoked so we know you're talking to us and not the chat. We'll be jotting them down throughout the debate. Because it's a little busy, we'll probably only be accepting super chats, but we might be able to get to some good questions as well. So just write them anyways. And if it's a good enough question, we'll ask. Also, make sure no family.
Real quick, I'm going to increase the playback speed to 1.25.
Families, no girlfriends, no wives. It's off limits. I don't care what you guys type, but they won't be read. So behave. Yeah, so I guess we can get started with opening statements. Rob, you want to get us going?
Yeah, real quick, just a question. How long are we planning on going? Just influences, but all I want to talk about. That's all.
They usually run about like 2 hours.
Okay, sounds good. Works for me. Okay. Yeah, I can give an opening statement. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what anyone has to defend to claim that Biden and his presidency has been a net positive. There are things that maybe you could say that he did that were okay on certain things, but I don't know how anyone could say that if you had to say whether or not you would consider his presidency good, would say that's the case. So I'll get to my reasons why. First is we have to say that it's not just Joe Biden, but it's actually his administration. And one, that's only fair. You would do that with any presidency, but particularly with the Biden presidency, because he's basically not all there. And more than any president in my lifetime, he's a figurehead. There are people behind the scenes that are actually running it. He doesn't know where he's at half the time. Nonetheless, the buck stops with Biden, so that's what we'll be talking about. I've basically broken down into three categories, the areas where I think that Biden is a failure, or perhaps that someone could Destiny argue that he succeeded. The first would be foreign policy. Second would be domestic policy. The third's like more of a catch-all. I would say like scandals or sort of his impression as president and things like that. So on foreign policy, there is no arguing that I could see to make the case that Biden has been a success on foreign policy. He entered his presidency with historic Middle East peace deals. Soon after entering, we saw fighting in the Middle East with Israel, Palestine. We saw the ability, we had to bomb Syria because allegedly Iran was attacking U.S. interests there. So we saw disastrous bombing campaigns in Syria because a third country did something terrible. We saw France being pissed because at the last minute they were left out of a nuclear sub deal. And that's one of the things that we were told with Biden, he would bring respect back to our allies. Our allies know that he's a joke, like France being upset with this situation. He was censured in the UK because of his disastrous pullout of Afghanistan without correctly working with the UK in order to do so. So you can see that our allies are furious. The Afghanistan debacle was one of the biggest egg on face things that has occurred to the U.S. foreign policy policy-wise since Vietnam. American troops died. Hundreds of Americans were left behind. He actually allowed Bagram Air Base to be taken over, which allowed ISIS to be freed, which allowed ISIS to then kill our troops. He relied on the Taliban, the very group that freed those ISIS troops, for security in Afghanistan and the sole air base that we had left, which was predictably a disaster. He brought a bunch of people in that he claimed were vetted that we now know weren't vetted. So this was a disaster. Then, after getting egg on his face, he decided to prove that he was a tough guy by bombing ISIS-K, which actually was just a bunch of children that he murdered. Our enemies are emboldened. We see Russia being emboldened with Ukraine. We see China being emboldened with Taiwan. Foreign policy is a disaster. Domestic policy, some of the big areas that I think we could hit on, his COVID policies have been a disaster. If anything, he should have at least been better than Donald Trump on this. He wasn't. It seems his entire plan is to rely on the vaccine that was created under Trump. That's about it. On the economy, we have historic inflation. We have stagnation. Things are looking horrible when it comes to the economy. We can get more to that. We have a border crisis. We have supply chain issues and energy problems. So much so, and even if you're progressive and you're for Green New Deal type stuff, I mean, the guy's begging OPEC to increase the production of fossil fuels after he's basically virtue signaling that we need to end fossil fuels. Last thing is scandals and things like that. Let's not forget he offered that we still don't know who the 10% that was going to the big guy, which only makes sense in this context because it seems really weird that Biden is unwilling to criticize China about COVID. Even if you don't think that COVID came from a lab in China, remember, one of the first things Biden did was disband Trump's task force seeing the origins of COVID. Then after public pressure, he actually restarted it, which, surprise, surprise, they came to no conclusion within like a month or two afterwards. But he doesn't criticize China for this. Even if China didn't create it in a lab, we know that they lied over and over, which led to the spread happening initially. And yet, for some reason, Biden never wants to criticize China for that. We see that the FBI is targeting parents. We see that they're targeting political opposition. And we see that they're acting as a Gestapo, putting political prisoners in jail without their due process rights, such as some of the people that didn't commit violence January 6th and the terrible things that are happening there. He's telling people to ignore the courts. When the courts ruled against his mandates, he's basically telling them to rule against them. He has dementia, and if I could speak to Destiny just for a second, look no further to the things you've been arguing about with the Kyle Rittenhouse and how horrible our media is. Joe Biden led to that by directly calling Kyle Rittenhouse a white supremacist. He claimed that his reason for running for president was because Donald Trump said Nazis were good people. That's when he decided he was going to run. And so all of this division and lies that you see coming out of the media comes straight from the top, from the Biden presidency. So last thing I'll say is this: the polls don't lie. We don't have to trust every poll, but it's clear that even a lot of Democrats understand that Biden's been a big disaster. And there's even scuttlebutt inside the party that they might seek someone different in 2024 because they know he's been a disaster. But that's it.
All right, Destiny.
So you can see that was exactly 5 minutes. Oftentimes the way I do these intros is I just have some key thoughts wrote down, and then I have a pretty good innate ability to know where my time is and what's left. I think it was a pretty good opener. That's exactly how I would focus on almost any presidency: foreign policy, domestic policy, and then sort of the presentation of the presidency through things like scandals, public trust, things like that. I think that it was true when this debate occurred in November 30th of 2021 that Biden was an abysmal failure in all three of those aspects, and it's even more true today. The scandals have gotten worse. The foreign policy, I talked about our enemies being emboldened between things like Russia and Ukraine. We could see what's happened there. Domestically, we could see the economy isn't any better. The COVID situation isn't any better. Biden hasn't done anything that made things better on that front. The border crisis has only gotten worse. Now, I am subjective. Please make up your own mind. But I think that I crushed Destiny in this debate. However, let me say Destiny has an uphill battle trying to defend Joe Biden. It would take a incredibly talented debater to beat me on that because it's just fundamentally not true. His administration has been terrible by almost any metric. And you'll see here that Destiny, tries his best, but it's obvious that he's floundering through many parts of this debate because the facts just aren't on his side. So I'm going to leave Destiny's opening go uninterrupted, and then I'm going to talk about what my strategy was to hash this debate out. So let's hear what Destiny has to say.
Geez, I wrote down talking points, but I guess I don't want my opening statement to just be to respond to every single word I'm talking about, because I imagine we'll get into that in the back and forth. In terms of the three major things that I kind of wanted to focus on, I think that the coronavirus relief is obviously going to be a big part. I think that Biden had accomplished some historic parts in this coronavirus relief. One of the big focuses is obviously going to be the quasi-UBI that he started with the child tax credit. This is the thing that most people talk about, the slashing of childhood poverty, the ensuring of food delivery to a lot of these children as a result of having that money to these families. We can also talk about the unemployment insurance, which was a great stimulus to the majority of the American people. I believe the U.S. gave out more stimulus than any country in the world except maybe Japan, which I thought was really really great because the U.S. is historically seen as a country that is unwilling to give stimulus to its people when they're hurting. The second thing that we'll go into is Afghanistan. I think that Biden was incredibly brave in pulling out of Afghanistan. I think that there are a million reasons why weaker leaders would have stayed because they were worried about getting a little bit of egg on their face because that pullout was never going to be clean. I think that given the Doha deal that had already been signed in agreement with Donald Trump, who didn't involve the Afghanistan government in that agreement, I don't think that anything else could have possibly happened with that, but perhaps we'll get into that as well. And then on the third thing, the infrastructure bill, the largest infrastructure bill in history that was passed in the United States, over $500 billion authorized in new spending. Rob said earlier that Biden virtue signaled on green energy when this infrastructure bill directly funds a lot of green energy, which I believe is the opposite of virtue signaling. There's a million other things we can talk about. The idea about blaming Biden for fighting in Israel and Palestine when Trump was the one that moved the embassy east from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is laughable. The idea that bombing Syria is a horrible thing when Trump also bombed Syria. The idea that our enemies are emboldened when there was a widespread amount of disrespect for Donald Trump as a leader when he was doing things like photo ops with Kim Jong-un, where his own Secretary of State was telling him, yeah, these talks fell apart, nothing happened. If you're not talking about emboldening enemies, I think that Trump obviously won there versus anything else. But I don't want to respond to every point in the opening statement. We can just go back and forth on some particular thing if you want. Yeah, I'm good.
So notice Destiny makes three, he tries to respond to a couple things I said, but that's reasonable. Your opening statement shouldn't be about responding to the other side's opening statement. The opening statement's just an outline of this is why I believe that I'm right on this topic, and then Destiny gives his reasons, so you can't blame him for not responding to me. That's reasonable, but what are his reasons that he gives that Joe Biden is good, his administration has been good? He gives three reasons. One, by the way, the speed's at 1.25 speed, but yeah, we're fast anyways, both of us. Destiny gives three reasons. One is COVID, second is Afghanistan, and third is infrastructure. And if you'll notice, those are basically three things that I said that he was terrible with. So there's actually direct clash, which is good. That's good for a debate. So for example, Afghanistan and COVID, I say by name that those were disastrous policies. So obviously those are areas that we should debate. And when he says infrastructure, that's a specific thing that has to do domestically with the economy, which I mentioned that I thought Biden had been bad for the economy. So in a way, that's a direct refutation or direct clash to a claim I made. So I like hearing Destiny's opening there because it's not like I'm saying Biden's been terrible for foreign policy and the economy, and Destiny says Biden's been great for cancer research and for space exploration. Because then it's like, well, we're both talking about things that aren't really connecting. There's not a lot of clash there. It makes it better for me when he's going to basically say, the points that you directly said were bad, Rob, I think were good. And so I thought that the best way to do this debate was basically to break it down into those categories. Let's talk domestic issues. I want to talk about COVID. I want to talk about Afghanistan. And I want to talk about the economy. Because those are the three things in both of our openings that we had disagreement on. So I think it makes sense. Now, this is only a 2-hour debate. And I think, 40 minutes of it or a half hour of it was intended to be audience questions. I don't remember if it came to that or not. But you can't get to everything. You could talk for hours and hours. So, people will say, well, why didn't you talk about Biden's policy that did this or gun control or this or that? No, I'm not saying those aren't important issues, but for the context of this debate, I'm happy that based on the opening statements that we have things directly to clash with each other and disagree on. And so, I know there was a lot of talk in Destiny's chat or at least on the video, excuse me, that he put up on YouTube of his audience saying, well, why did Rob control the direction the debate went? Well, it was just to keep the debate clean. And it was the three topics that Destiny wanted to talk about as well. COVID, Afghanistan, inflation, economy. So, I think that was my plan, to hit those three topics. So, if I remember, I started with COVID. And so let's see where we go with that.
All right, floor's open then.
All right, if you don't mind, just to set the stage for this debate, I think the Biden presidency's been terrible. How would you rate it? Would you say it's just okay or it's good?
Given the set of circumstances, I would say that Biden, if you would have asked me what he could have accomplished with a 50-person Senate, I would say that he is exceeded my expectation in almost every possible manner by this point in time. I would have never expected it to be as effective as it has been. I wouldn't have thought anything would have gotten done. That would have been my guess.
Okay, so but getting things done doesn't necessarily an indicator of whether or not those things getting done are good, right? So just saying that he's been able to mire through red tape that you thought he wouldn't have been. Like when we look at the actual day-to-day lives of Americans, like take the first issue you talked about, COVID. Would you say that Biden's been a success on that issue of COVID?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't know how much the president, like a lot of this is going to come down to a state by state decision, and sometimes even a county by county decision on how they want to manage the coronavirus. In terms of what the president is able to do, the mandating all federal workers get vaccinated and have masks, the distribution of vaccines to the United States citizens, which I believe are still all completely free. I mean, like these are good things, but I mean, the president can only reach so much into states when states still have the authority to write their own policy.
So already you can see something that fundamentally shows sort of a double standard that Destiny's going to have. Because if you remember, if you go back last Monday, right, and see the debate I had with Destiny that was about 17 months prior to this. So me and Destiny had a debate that was, I believe, May 1st, 2020. And so that was while Trump was still in office. COVID had been a thing for about 2 months, or at least been taken seriously for 2 months. George Floyd riots had began 5 days previous to that. And a lot of that debate, if you go back and watch last Monday, where I was reviewing that debate, had to do with COVID. And it had to do with Destiny just excoriating how bad of a job Trump had done. He was terrible. His reaction was despicable. Now you notice as soon as we get to a year into Biden's presidency, so we're 18 months later, we're a year into Biden's presidency, and I'm like, how do you think Biden did with COVID? And he's like, well, you know, it's a state-by-state thing, and it's, you know, there's only so much that a president could do. And this is the same tack that almost all Democrats took. Joe Biden himself, you know, I don't know if it was a tweet or an interview where he said, you know, 200 and something thousand dead, the blood is on President's hand, Trump's hands. The argument was Trump was responsible for all of the deaths of COVID, of this brand new disease that came up. Now, I've criticized Trump's reaction to COVID many, many times. And I will do so in the future. And if you want to see some of my criticisms, you could go back to watch the debate I had with Destiny last Monday, that debate from May of 2020. You go back to my videos in March of 2020, where I was criticizing Trump's response to COVID, particularly embracing lockdowns and things like that. So I criticized in a different way than the Democrats did, who wanted more lockdowns. I thought Trump paid lip service too much to them. But there were certainly things to criticize Trump about. But it was amazing to me, and I had said this for a long time, what was the Democrat, if they were in office, what was their plan going to be? It seemed all they did was make fun of the idea that Trump wanted to ban travel from China and said he was a racist. They said, go hug a Chinese person. That was the Democrats' plan. You know, but people like Destiny and Democrats and people in the media, they said Trump's responsible for all this. And then when the record under 1 year of Trump with COVID versus 1 year of Biden with COVID, when the record was worse under Biden, more people had died, despite the fact that we had more knowledge of the virus, including the vaccines that Biden claimed were central to beating COVID. And yet Biden's record was worse. And all of a sudden the Democrats were like, well, there's only so much he could do. The president can't do everything. And so you could see just already from May 2020, Destiny saying, Trump's horrible, he's the worst. He's literally screaming about it in our debate. All this COVID, it couldn't have been worse. And then when it's like, how do you think Biden did? Well, you know, he's only president. He can only do so much. So right out of the gate, I think that's humorous.
Okay, so we'll get in. We can start with COVID if you want, but I'll just say in general, I don't know what your stance was, but if I could guess, I would think that you would have thought that Trump was terrible on COVID. It's frustrating to me to see a lot of people in our national media and in the Democratic Party that wanted to blame Trump for every death that occurred under COVID with him. They didn't say, well, actually, it was more up to the states and things like that. And then when it's Biden, they're like, well, he can only do so much, when we see that there are more deaths under him than there were under Trump.
Yeah, so when people say that Trump was terrible on COVID, there is only so much that a president can do, but a president can provide guidance. That's all a president can do. Trump's guidance was first non-existent and then terrible. I would say that Biden's guidance has been good. But I mean, we could conceive of a world where Trump's guidance was better, but there were still deaths. But at that point, I wouldn't be blaming Trump over it. I mean, we literally had, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of cases in the US that were still undiagnosed on a formal level, while Trump was denying that the coronavirus even existed, or that it was even coming, or that it wasn't going to be a big deal. To compare Trump's lead up to that over and over and over again, and the lackluster pushing of getting, the PPE and everything doled out to what Biden has done, which has been to take it incredibly seriously. I would take Biden a million times over. If Biden would have been president instead of Trump, we probably would have been in a better position to absorb this virus than how we have now.
What would he...
Now, and so this is another argument that you heard constantly. Well, Biden took it serious. Biden said vaccines were good, and Biden said masks were good. Right. He said those things, right, after it was evident that that was a way to attack Trump, right? The Democrats, including Biden, were saying that COVID was so unserious that it was xenophobic to stop travel from China. Go hug a Chinese person, Nancy Pelosi said. Go to Chinatown and hug a Chinese person. That was the Democrat. Dr. Fauci was saying in January the flu was going to be worse than COVID. So how was Trump supposed to be some genius that was like, no, in reality, I know that Fauci and all of these people are wrong and that it's going to be worse. Now, maybe he should have taken it more serious sooner. But the Democrats, the counter certainly wasn't, right? And the idea that it's signaling that matters, isn't that interesting? Now it's just like, well, who cares if more people died under Joe Biden? He said masks were important. He said vaccines were important. He took it serious. Right, and it did nothing. But it's so funny. And by the way, words are cheap. Maybe that's what the Biden administration was saying, but what were they doing? Remember, one of the first things Biden did was institute a mask mandate on federal property. Immediately, the day that he signed that, he went to, I believe it was the Lincoln Memorial, and took pictures with his family not wearing a mask. Immediate. So yes, words are cheap. He was able to, photo ops and words, he was able to go out and, say masks are important. Now we know that masks didn't do that much, particularly outside. And so the idea, it's like, well, he took it serious, and that's what matters. That's how nakedly partisan these people are. Well, as long as he took it serious, who cares if the outcome was worse? He took it serious. That's the important thing. Now, if we find out that actually vaccines for a lot of people could have been harmful, or, mask mandates and things like that could have been harmful, lockdowns for children could have been harmful, that all of a sudden, that taking it serious, another way of saying it is that they overreacted, which caused health problems, economic problems, mental health problems, learning problems, etc. And so Biden would be more responsible. But it's very difficult to argue with someone that's just like, well, I felt they took it more serious, therefore it was okay. Why is that a metric we should take seriously?
He have done differently.
So recognizing that it existed formally in the beginning probably would have spurred on more American support for things like PPE or like social distancing, rather than Trump, who continually denied it. And even today, when Trump says, hey guys, maybe you should get vaccinated, people are like, nah, fuck no. So I think that type of like moral or spiritual or leadership guidance would have gotten the American public in general to be in a more receptive state for state governors and then county and city leaders to enact these types of social distancing or other regulations too.
So we can see now. So he's saying that the type of social distancing that these governors are doing now that Biden's president were effective. They weren't, as we can see from the actual numbers. So PPE didn't do much. The social distancing policies didn't do much. So the idea that, well, had Trump taken it more seriously, this would have happened, is nonsense. And the argument that Destiny's going to go for is the same argument that Biden goes for, that it's all about the vaccine. And so I'm pretty sure what I show here is, if you want to talk about taking it serious, Trump has always, much to many of his supporters' chagrin, been pro-vaccine. He's touted the vaccine, a potential vaccine, since the summer of 2020, and how it was going to be this great savior. So if you're on the left and you're like, yes, the vaccine's the best thing, that's what we need, it was actually Biden and the Democrats that were criticizing the vaccine. Trump never criticized it. So if it's all about sending a signal, how is it that the signal of Biden, who first criticized the vaccine and then said, never mind, not only is the vaccine good, but you should be forced to take it? How is that not a mixed signal?
The slow the spread of the virus.
I think that this is a cop-out for several reasons. One, the idea that it's not the policies and stuff, but it's mere just their guidance, their leadership. That's just bullshit. Secondly, Trump was taking this serious far earlier than even people like Fauci, right? For example, Trump decided, we heard Fauci in February on CNN and other places saying, oh, the regular flu is going to be worse. We had prominent Democrats, even after Trump started to talk about potential things we'd need to do, saying, there's no problem. Go out to Chinatown and hug a Chinese person. The only thing that Biden suggested that would have been different at the onset of COVID, which is where you're focusing, is he claimed that Trump banning travel from China was xenophobic. That's what he claimed. So how can you claim that Biden would have taken it more seriously when the very first thing he said that would have been different was, I wouldn't have banned travel from China because I think that has tinges of racism to it?
Okay, sorry, I'm just writing all this.
That's all right.
So,
yeah, no problem.
if we want to jump into each claim, we can dig through these, but almost all of these are either half true or completely false. So first, when we say it's not the policies, it's their guidance, that's not a cop-out. Presidents are like, a president can set a legislative agenda. A president can work with politicians to get things passed, and a president can absolutely set the tone. If you want to get into a side argument for can a president influence the beliefs of Americans and what they ought to do, and whether or not that becomes down the line instrumental to the types of policies that can pass, I can't imagine that you would seriously argue against that. But I mean, we can have this sort of argument if we want. Number one. Number two, Trump was taking this seriously earlier than Fauci. This is just not true. So we can talk about, and Republicans have two talking points to go to. It's the Chinese travel ban and it's the European travel ban. Both of these were done after the WHO declared, a pandemic or declared a problem in China. Trump wasn't ahead on either of these things. If Trump was truly ahead, he would have banned travel from Europe the same day he banned travel from China. He waited over a month to do it. And in that waiting period, we did nothing. We did nothing to get ready. After we banned travel from China, we knew it was becoming a pandemic around the world, and we sat and waited. And then a month and a half later, like, oh, well, time to ban travel from Europe when we aren't even fully testing people in the United States because it took us so long to get tests out of the US. We had no idea that it was spreading to thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. To say that Trump took it seriously earlier, I mean, like, this is one of those, I'm trying.
Destiny said this in the debate I had with him in May of 2020. Again, this debate that you're watching right now was from November 30th, 2021. So over a year ago. And Destiny said this in a debate I had with him in May of 2020. He talked about the importance of early testing, but he didn't show me the country that did a great job with early testing, nor did he explain how that early testing would have been created here in the United States. Nor did he explain, well, now he has no way to explain how with that testing and a year of Joe Biden's presidency, so testing was now readily available, and yet the numbers weren't declining. So the idea, if we would have just had tests, everything would have been okay. There's no evidence for that. Anywhere. None whatsoever.
Trying to find a synonym for psychotic. We can all watch the videos. Everybody can go online and Google Trump talking about coronavirus, and we can see when there's like 1 case, 7 cases, like, oh, it's probably going to go away. Oh, there's not going to be many. Like, we all watched him say this. I don't even know if I'm willing to argue on this point. Everybody.
Who was saying otherwise? Who was saying otherwise? Was Joe Biden? Was Hillary Clinton? Was Nancy Pelosi? Was Chuck Schumer?
They weren't president, and they weren't privy to the same types of information that he was. Okay, number one. Okay, and then.
But the question, if I could just interrupt you.
Right, and so the question I had was, what would Democrats have done differently? And he's like, well, Trump wasn't taking it seriously. And I said, who was? Show me the Democrats. Well, they weren't president. Right. So there's no evidence that they would have taken it more seriously, especially when the guy that they still to this day told us we were supposed to rely on, Dr. Fauci, was saying in February that it would not be any worse than the average flu. Now, it's easy in hindsight to say, no, obviously, I think the numbers are blown out of proportion, but it's still very serious. COVID was a serious thing, no doubt, particularly for people over the age of 75. But it was used to usher in authoritarian fascist policies. It was blown way out of proportion. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't a serious thing, that Trump should have taken more seriously early. That's true, he should have. But who was in the United States? When the opposition was taking it so much less serious that they were like, well, go hug a Chinese person. So Destiny just wants to, and again, this wouldn't fly the other way, right? If a disease hits next year, a different disease, and it kills 100,000 people in a year, and Biden doesn't address it until 3 months in, and it's too late, the disease has already started to spread, and I said, Biden screwed the pooch, and he comes out 3 months in and he's like, we got to take this serious. And Republicans are like, no. Do you think Destiny's going to say, oh, well, Republicans probably would have done better. Biden didn't do anything. Of course not. Of course he's not going to say that.
Rob. Hold on, I'm trying to get through all of it. Sure. So continuing on, we heard Fauci say that the regular flu was going to be worse. I don't understand how simultaneously people will attack Fauci for saying it was going to kill millions and then attack Fauci saying it wasn't going to kill anybody. I'm sure that Fauci has updated his views over time. It seems like generally when Fauci is talking about things, they tend to update as more information comes out. I'm sure that I could find something back in like 2004.
But again, that's the point. Right. It was easy once there were tons of deaths to say, oh, now it's serious. But Destiny's whole criticism of Trump is, well, when it mattered early on in the pandemic, Trump wasn't doing anything. And it's like, well, the doctor that he was told to trust was saying in February, which would have been a crucial time to get ready, was saying the flu was going to be worse. So Destiny blames Trump. He says, oh, he should have been ready. But the actual doctor, Fauci, he's like, well, he updated his talking points. Right, once it was too late. But he doesn't blame him. Do you notice that?
But like in late 2019 or early 2020, where Fauci said something that later ended up not necessarily being true, that's fine. That happens as this situation is evolving. Sure. When you talk about how, I believe it might have been Pelosi, you didn't say a name, but I think it was Pelosi, that said there's no problem, go out to Chinatown and hug a Chinese person. This wasn't because they were saying there was no problem, as you disingenuously implied. It was because people like Trump, and then because of his things about calling it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus, because that happened later on in the United States, we saw a small uptick in hate crimes against Chinese people, or Asian people in general, because Americans think all people are Chinese. And then we saw people like not going to Chinese restaurants and stuff, because somehow this virus was unique to Chinese people. So, and as a response to the attacks that Chinese Americans had to deal with to their businesses and their persons sometimes, I think that's a totally fine statement. And it's not implying there's no problem. It's just saying the virus doesn't originate from Chinese people. Sorry, two more quick things. You said that claiming that Trump banned travel from China was xenophobic. This is a claim. I think I've heard you even say this before. I always try to look this up. I can never find that. All I find are people saying that calling it the Chinese virus or trying to blame Chinese people on this or using that verbiage was problematic. I don't think I could find things where people are like, oh, we should have never banned travel from China. I didn't say that. Or saying we can't ban travel from China. And then what's further evidence of this, you say if Biden was president or whatever, they wouldn't have done it. The United States just announced a preemptive travel ban on South Africa, plus I think either 6 or 7 other African countries. How can you say they wouldn't have banned travel from China or any other country?
Well, based on
now, I just want to say I don't mind what just happened here, right? I really don't. But Destiny's audience accuses me of gish galloping. That's the common when they have nothing to say to me. I'm a gish galloper. So I'm not going to make that criticism of Destiny, but you can see when they say you make a bunch of points at once, you can see that Destiny did it there. And you could say, well, he was responding to you. Right, but he does the same thing that I do. I don't have a problem with it. You're not going to hear me whine and complain. But I just thought it was worth bringing out there.
Dr. Mark, Fox News contributor,
getting a source here. So, here is the tweet. It's from Joe Biden. It was the day that, a day after the travel ban was announced from China. He said, quote, "We're in the midst of a crisis with the coronavirus. We need to lead the way with science, not Donald Trump's record of hysteria, xenophobia, and fear-mongering. He's the worst possible person to lead our country through a global health emergency." So when Trump was announcing that he was going to do this ban, Biden almost at the exact same time announces that this is hysteria and xenophobia. Notice he uses the word hysteria as well. Now, you eloquently put it out a bunch of things that you think was bad with Trump. Fine. I could argue whether or not that's not the topic, though. The topic is, what would Biden have done differently? You're just assuming Biden would have done something differently. When I talk about what prominent Democrats were up to, you really have no defense of that. You're just like, well, Nancy Pelosi did say go hug a Chinese person, but that's because there was an uptick of hate crimes because Trump was blaming this on China. That's one thing Trump did better was he blamed China, which we could see that Biden, for some reason, the big guy getting 10%, is hesitant to ever criticize China for COVID, when we know that even if you don't think it came from a lab in China, that certainly China's lies, we now know that they knew that it was spread airborne and that it spread person to person months before they suggested it, which could have been a crucial time if that information would have been made available, that places in Europe and the United States could have prevented travel, which would have helped stop a lot of the initial problems that we saw. And yet the Biden administration doesn't want to criticize them. And instead, what we see from the Democrats is saying, well, that reeks of xenophobia, and there were upticks of Chinese American hate crimes. That's terrible. There were upticks in these crimes. A lot of them, though, there were an uptick in these crimes that were occurring even before that. And a lot of them weren't from what we would consider traditional Trump voters. In fact, a lot of Nation of Islam type members, there was a lot of anti-Asian hate crimes that were going on in New York. And this wasn't coming from Trump voters necessarily. Secondly, though, the fact that Biden spoke about this potentially being xenophobia, no Democrat, you keep saying Trump should have taken this more seriously early. Where were the Democrats doing so? You say Fauci would have changed his mind. On February 15th, 2020, Fauci was going on national TV saying, oh, this isn't going to be a big deal. What did you want Trump to do? You said he had access to better information. If the point person that he's relying on, Dr. Fauci, is going on national television and saying, this isn't a big deal. Look, it was a month later when Trump started issuing these things. So it was a very short turnaround. And to claim, well, that turnaround sent the signal for the whole thing is nonsense. If we want to talk about signaling and like guidance and leadership and that being an important role, again, we don't have any evidence whatsoever that Biden would have done things differently. In fact, we could see once Biden was president, what did he do? He signaled, great, and more people were dead than there were under Trump. So that signaling seems to be very ineffective. And secondly, what would this, let's talk about signaling. We had Biden, Kamala Harris, and other prominent Democrats that seemed to cast doubt on The very vaccine that they're now saying, oh, and I know that people say, oh, they were saying they didn't trust it because they assumed Trump would monkey with it and he would be involved in the FDA. Oh, you mean like Biden was involved in the FDA and 2 people from the head of the FDA were forced to resign because they didn't agree with Biden's pressure on them when it came to booster shots? So the idea, like, I keep hearing that if Biden would have been there, things would have been different. You've presented no evidence. I've yet to see anyone present evidence. And the proof is in the pudding. What has Biden done? What's Biden's strategy to COVID? Like, you say the president can only do so much. That's not true. There are things that both Biden and Trump didn't do that are disastrous. For example, one of the big things that the United States hasn't done is increased rapid and free testing to almost every person. Why haven't we invested? We have all of these emergency bills and decisions. Neither Trump nor Biden correctly invested that in saying if we could get tests in the hands of people, we could drastically diminish the amount of people that are spreading this virus because they'd be able to test at home. And yet they didn't do. And there's plenty of other things like that we could see. So the idea that it's just, well, providing guidance. And what exactly was the guidance? After they maligned the vaccine, then they said, oh, we're all in on the vaccine. That's our only strategy. Plus we think masks, which there's not proof does much, are good. And then Biden, he issues this mask mandate, for federal property. And what's the first thing he does? He goes out to the Capitol building, or maybe it was the Lincoln Memorial, and he takes a picture with his family violating his own order, which we've seen Biden and Democrats and even Republicans do over and over again. So the guidance has been shit all around, and none of the policies that Biden has issued have been any better than anything Trump did. In fact, you could argue that Biden is significantly worse because when he came into office, he should have had a plan. He already had the vaccines that he's relied so heavily on, and yet he's still been an abysmal failure.
Okay, so I can't, when you ask me for like proof that Biden could have done better, you're essentially conceding that Trump was about as bad as you could have been as a president, and then you're telling me to give you like a historical counterfactual of Biden. I can't do that. I can't give you a world where Biden was president. I mean, I can look at how Biden handled things as he came into office. I can look at the difference between how he's treated it publicly, which is very serious, versus Trump, who treated it as a fucking joke publicly, while behind the scenes admitting to people, it was in Woodward's book, that he said that it was very serious. You talk about how China could have released this information earlier. Trump knew in February that it was airborne. He knew that it was a serious thing, and he continued to downplay it publicly because he was more worried about his political image than the actual safety of fellow American citizens. I can't sit here and say, like, well, if Biden was president, would have done this. I don't know what Biden necessarily would have done as president, but I feel like Democrats in general were taking this more seriously from the start than the Republican side of things seemed to have been. And I mean, we can see
it's not true. Again, they were saying go out and hug a Chinese person. They were talking about xenophobia. They were saying don't blame China. And again, this debate is supposed to be on Biden's record. Now, the reason that we are talking about Trump is because Destiny is saying when it comes to COVID, Biden did good compared to Trump. And so we're trying to see. He didn't. If you just look at the numbers, he didn't. He did worse, right? But Destiny has this nebulous reason why that doesn't matter. Well, he signaled. And if he was there earlier, he would have done something different. And then when I'm like, there's no evidence of that. It's not like Biden was saying in March or April of 2020, this is what needs to be done. It's not like there was any Democrat saying that. None. And yet Destiny is the person making the claim, had Biden or Democrats been there, things would have been different. So when he says, well, I can't give you evidence, well, you're the one who made the claim, not me, right? We're supposed to be talking about Biden's record. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. And he defaults to Trump was really bad. Okay, even if that's true, does that mean Biden's been good? Well, how would we measure that? Why wouldn't we, if Trump was so bad, wouldn't we look at how many people got infected and died under 9 months of Trump versus how many people got infected and died under 9 months of Biden? Biden had an incredible head start. Biden's entire strategy was, well, let's do social distancing and more importantly, let's do vaccines. They were already created. Trump only had access to those for a month or two. Now, I'm not saying that vaccines are good or bad. What I'm saying is that was Joe Biden's strategy. So everything was, including 1 million people, 1 million vaccines a day going out the door, which Biden bragged, that's what my plan is when I come into office. That's what was happening when he came into office. So he just was defending the status quo. So Biden had an incredible head start, and yet his performance, based on how many people were infected and died, were worse under the same time frame than under Donald Trump, despite having a year of knowing what the virus was and having things like vaccines that you claimed were going to be necessary. So again, I understand why he wants to deflect to Trump, but none of this is a defense of Joe Biden's record. He's just like, well, I don't know what he would have done after all of this discussion.
See that how it's played out in terms of Republican lawmakers that have gotten sick with the coronavirus versus Democratic ones. We can see this in terms of voters and how they've responded to the situation. You keep saying like, oh, Democrats attacked the coronavirus vaccine. They attacked it. Who's the one not getting vaccinated today? Are you telling me that Republicans ignore Democrats in every single circumstance, except when it came to the vaccine? They listened to some of the early, very, very, very early, like single statements that some people might have said about being like, oh, well, I'll wait until the FDA approves it. Like, come on, this is like, this is insane. This is the one thing the Republicans listen to people on. So I thought we were here to talk about Biden's record. If we want, we can go back into Trump's presidency more. But like, again, this is just like one of those things where like we can all watch the videos. We can, if you want, we can bring up like videos and timelines of Trump continuing to downplay what's happening. You can blame this on like one or two statements from Fauci, but if you want to make the overall argument that Trump was taking this more seriously than Fauci was, like it's just absolutely not true. Trump is on stage peddling bullshit cures, hydroxychloroquine, which ended up coming out to be harmful and not helpful. We've got like Fauci cautioning people when it comes to things later on. Now, initially, he might have gotten the mask thing not right, but later on, he encouraged people to wear masks and do the social distancing. You've got Trump encouraging people to get vaccinated, getting booed for it at rallies. I mean, again, we can go back and forth on like Trump's handling of this the entire time, but like, I can't tell you like for a fact 100% this is what Biden would have done differently because neither of us really know the answer to that question.
Okay, so he brought Trump up, right? He's the one who brought it up. He did better, right? Like if I was to ask you, like, you know, how's the economy doing? Oh, it's terrible under Biden. If he says, yeah, but it was worse under Trump, well, that doesn't mean Biden's record is good. And so that's what he did. He can't defend, you know, like if you go back and you watch the debate that we had in May 2020, Destiny was amped up about how bad things were under COVID under Trump, for how many people were getting infected and how many people died. Then when those numbers are worse under Joe Biden, all of a sudden he seems far less concerned. Well, Trump was bad, he says. Okay, what's that have to do with Biden's record? And then when pressed on it, he's like, wow, why are we talking about Trump? Because you brought it up.
I agree, but I'm saying even one of the big talking points as to why to vote against Trump was because of his handling of COVID. And my question always was there going to be a leader that would have handled it better? What would they have hypothetically done differently? And the best, at least you have an argument. Most people don't have an argument. Your argument's like, he would have had guidance. He would have talked differently. I think that would have done nothing. Like just a couple things you mentioned. You mentioned the Woodward book. Dr. Fauci was interviewed after he heard the quotes in the Woodward book, and he said that Trump's comments publicly at the time where he was talking and saying slightly different things to Woodward was in line with what medical advisors were suggesting to Trump what to say publicly, right? So he was basically being told, don't go freak everyone out horribly at the time. Fauci's admitted, who has no reason to lie for Donald Trump, that yeah, basically he didn't have a problem with the way Trump was talking publicly about COVID at the time, right? Now, you keep talking about, well, what does this have to do with Trump? I agree. The problem is this. You're going to say, and this is what I thought would happen in this debate. Let me just ask you a question before I continue. Would you say that you thought Trump was a very bad president?
I would say in general, yeah,
okay.
Atrocious.
So what's going to happen is, I might disagree with that, but the general thesis of this debate of how is Biden's record, how is he doing, you're going to say, well, better than Trump. But even if that's true and you think Trump was terrible, that doesn't mean Biden's doing good, right? If you say this guy was shit, Trump was shit, and Biden's slightly less shit. So we could look, you keep saying we could look at the record. Sure, we could look at the record of what was being said and things like that. Let's look at Biden's record on COVID. How's that looking? Pretty shitty. That's how it's looking. Well, he said that he was going to shut down the virus and not the economy. That's not true. That's not what happened. We see all kinds of economic misery, which we'll get to when we get there. More people have died. The only thing that he's basically relied on was a vaccine that he had no hand in even giving lip service to creating. In fact, the opposite. He gave lip service to not trusting the vaccine. And we see, although you're technically right that it seems to be Republicans that are least likely to trust the vaccine, even if you think the vaccine's a good thing, let's not forget when it comes to different demographics, we can see a lot of people, such as Black Americans, that are distrusting of the vaccine. I wonder why. Why would predominant Democrat groups like Black Americans be distrusting? Could it be because people like Biden and people in his administration have constantly pushed this narrative that it's systemic racism in the U.S. government and the pharmaceutical industry, and I wouldn't trust this vaccine until magically after the election, all of a sudden, now we can trust the vaccine. Now that Biden's here, not only do we trust the vaccine, but we think you should have to take it. But the point is, all of this is a moot point. We don't blame the president for what their followers do. Who gives a shit if it's predominantly Trump supporters doing things you don't like? Biden's the president now. The buck stops with him, and he is shit on COVID. End of story. And I would like to hear you convince people why that's not the case.
So one of the big promises that Biden made was getting, I believe it was like 100 million Americans vaccinated in the first 100 days of his presidency. Didn't he hit that milestone on like day 60?
Yep,
so I would argue in terms of providing whatever necessary federal support was there to get the vaccine out to the United States citizens, he not only met, but he well exceeded that goal. In terms of, you keep bringing this number up like it's over and over again, like the number of people that have...
Right, that was 1 million vaccines a day were going out the door when Trump took office. There were already people being vaccinated. So Biden kept the status quo going. That's the big, okay.
Died. I mean, like Biden inherited, again, a Democrat inherits a shitty situation from a Republican. I mean, it's not like you can reverse course on everything at that point. The virus is here. It's already in every state and every community. I don't know how Biden's supposed to just like turn back time on that. In terms of, there's so many, hold on, Jesus, there's like so much like random shit you bring up. If you want to like dive into one topic, I didn't know that also the coronavirus thing is just one part of the administration. And it, like the difference in approach here, if I'm being honest in the debate, I could lie and try to say, oh, well, Biden would come and he would have done. I don't know what Biden would have done 100% as the president, but I'm not here to only compare their stance to the coronavirus. I was mainly interested in like major legislative achievements and foreign policy, because it's a little bit easier to compare that on a one-to-one than a coronavirus pandemic that he walked into as it's going on and it's already been, in my opinion, botched by the previous leader. But
now go back to Destiny's opening. What was the first thing? either chat. I'm watching you chat on YouTube and watching you chat on Rumble. Someone tell me, what was the very first thing that Destiny said that Biden had done well? Does anyone remember? Let's see where we're at. We're at 28:36. Let's go back to Destiny's opening statement.
There's a million other things we can talk about. The idea about blaming Biden.
Criticize China about COVID. Even if you don't think that COVID came from a lab, we don't have to trust every poll, but it's clear that even a lot of
into is Afghanistan. I think that
he's been a disaster. That's it.
All right, Destiny.
Geez, I wrote down talking points, but I guess I don't want my opening statement to just be to respond to every single word I'm talking about, because I imagine we'll get into that in the back and forth. In terms of the three major things that I kind of wanted to focus on, I think that the coronavirus relief is obviously going to be a big part. I think that Biden had accomplished some historic parts in this coronavirus relief. One of the big focuses is obviously going to be the quasi-UBI that he started with the child tax.
Very first thing he said, coronavirus relief. That's the very first thing he said. Now, granted, he was talking about money given out, but it was his dealing with coronavirus. That's what the relief was. So that's the very first thing Destiny brings up. And then when he is unable to defend Biden's record on COVID, he's like, well, I didn't expect to talk about this. It was the first thing he brought up. He said he had three things. Coronavirus relief. Now, granted, I know if he was here, he'd say, I meant the bills. But the entire point was dealing with coronavirus. That's what the relief was about. So for him to then later in the debate, 28 minutes in, to be like, well, I didn't expect to talk about this, is nonsense. He's saying that because he can't defend Biden's record on COVID. He can't. And he knows in conversations he had with me when discussing how bad Trump was, he talked about how bad Trump was for COVID. He wants to avoid it because he can't defend Biden's record on it.
That's going on, and it's already been, in my opinion, botched by the previous leader. But then you're going to say, well, botched how? How could he have done something differently? And I can give you things maybe he would have done differently, but do either of us truly know that? We're both being demagogues at that point. Honestly, we're being honest with ourselves to say anything other than that. You don't know if Biden, but the reason why I tend to side with the fact that Biden probably would have taken it more seriously is because I think that Biden believed that it was a real issue. The Democrats believed that this is a real bad problem. There were Democrat states like New York that were being severely hampered by it. And it seems like Democrats in general in the United States, the voter base, seems to have more aggressive support for measures related to the coronavirus. So that leads me to believe that a Democratic president probably could have handled it a little bit better. It's hard to say, but like when I look at things like, say, the Ebola scare, when there was some French doctor that was flown back, it seemed like Obama took that seriously. And that was like nothing. Like the idea that Ebola was ever going to spread massively in the United States and Europe is probably not going to happen. It's not the type of virus to do it. But even that, I was hearing Obama take that seriously and was giving public speeches about it, and people seem to be worried about it. When you talk about like Black Americans being distrustful of the vaccine, and then you try to pretend that it's because of statements that like Democratic leaders have made, Black people have a lot of reasons for why they may or may not trust different systems in the United States. I could be totally wrong on this, but I seriously doubt that the average Black American is tuning into CNN to get their political discourse for the day, and then they're making decisions on whether or not to trust the medical system based on what they hear on mainstream media news. It probably has more to do with a history of weird, fucky things that have happened to Black people in the United States. Tuskegee is brought up pretty often as an example. I'm willing to bet that combined with socioeconomic conditions, combined with their already adversarial attitude towards the system that is adversarial towards them, is probably going to lead to them to not trust the vaccine or care about it as much as other Americans. I don't know if I'm going to say that I'm going to blame a couple of statements made by Democratic leaders on how African Americans in the United States feel about the vaccine. That seems a little bit silly to me. If you
we'll get off COVID. The last thing I want to say.
Sure, okay, go for it.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous on the COVID talk on YouTube. So.
Oh shit! Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just say this. I'll just ask one quick question then. Do you acknowledge that Biden and people in his administration seemed to cast shade on the vaccine before Biden won? And do you think that could have caused people hesitancy?
I think that there were like one or two statements that I want to say it was Kamala Harris said something about where I don't think they full on said like, I'm not going to trust it, but it was something like it was something that was a little bit irresponsible. I was like, you probably shouldn't have said it that way. But like compared to how much Trump has cast out on everything related to the coronavirus stuff, not even remotely close.
Yeah, but if the big issue is people getting vaccinated or not vaccinated, that specific thing of casting shade, and it wasn't just Biden, it was certainly a lot of his administration and a lot of health experts that they were routinely touting that said it would be impossible. We wouldn't trust this. And Biden made those claims as well. The last thing I'll say is this, right?
Wait, you said Biden made a claim that he wouldn't trust a vaccine?
Yeah, Biden said, I'll try to find the actual quote.
Now, I just want to be clear. If you go and you watch what Destiny's audience had to say, if you go in the comments of Destiny's video of this, what they say is, over and over, I said things that weren't true. So I want you to see a theme throughout this debate. Almost everything that I say, I end up bringing up the source. Destiny's like, I don't think that happened, and then I'm correct. And that's going to be the case here. And the reason this particular argument matters is the only thing that he could say that Biden did good was he set a signal that he took it seriously. That was it. He was unable to say how his policies were beneficial. He just said, well, Biden signaled. So if the signal was, we don't trust this vaccine, and everybody knows, like, he could be disingenuous if he wants. Anyone could be disingenuous. What changed after November that all of a sudden the vaccines were good? And not only were they good, but you should be forced to take them. Why was it in October, we don't believe these vaccines could happen, I wouldn't trust them, Trump's trying to rush them, we shouldn't trust them, to all of a sudden after November it was, yeah, they're good and you should be forced to take them. What happened? Well, they won the election. That's what happened. So the idea that these people were taking it seriously is ridiculous. They weren't. That's exactly what happened, and you'll see the proof here.
Let me see what I can find. Give me a second and I'll find it, but yeah. Well, shit. Now I'm finding. Let's see if I can find it. But the other thing I want to say as I look for this is you say that actually, Biden did a good job meeting his goal of 1 million a day, and he may have even surpassed that. But the reality is Biden's claim to get 1 million a day was already being met basically by Trump when he left office. So it's hardly an achievement that Biden came in and just continued Trump's plan. This is what Biden said in August 6, 2020. The way Trump talks about the vaccine is not particularly rational. He's talking about being ready. He's going to talk about moving it quicker than scientists think it should move. People don't believe he's telling the truth. Therefore, they aren't certain they're going to take the vaccine. And one more thing, if and when vaccines comes, it's not likely to go through all the tests that need to be done and the trials that are needed to be done.
Who is this a quote from?
Biden. Another quote from Biden, September 2nd, 2020. Look at what's happened. Enormous pressure put in the CDC not to put the detailed guidelines. The enormous pressure being put on the FDA to say they're going, that the following protocol will in fact reduce. It will have a giant impact on COVID. All these things turn out to not be true. And when a president continues to mislead and lie, when we finally do, God willing, get a vaccine, who's going to take the shot? Who's going to take the shot? You're going to be the first one to say, put me, sign me up. Now they say it's okay. I'm not being facetious. Again, Biden.
Now, two things. One, outside of the scope of this debate, isn't it amazing that that's the sort of things that President Biden and Kamala Harris and Democrats were saying in September of 2020? They're rushing the vaccine. Who the hell's going to want to take it? That's a far cry from 4 months later them saying, we're going to make your life hell if you don't take it. How dare you? You're a conspiracy theorist. For what? Believing what you believed 4 months ago? Isn't it amazing? And secondly, notice how Destiny was like, I don't think Biden said it. Then I provide the quotes. He doesn't say, oh yeah, you're right, that was very bad. When it came to Trump downplaying things like social distancing or masks, Destiny was all over him. But when it came to Biden downplaying vaccines, which Destiny thinks are very important, notice that Destiny has a completely different standard. So if signaling and taking it serious were the things that were really important, how does he reconcile what Biden and the Democrats were saying about these vaccines? And again, I know what you're thinking out there. If you're watching me, you're probably like, well, the vaccines are bad, and they were, that's irrelevant. If Destiny and his audience and the Democrats' claim is, and Biden's claim, our vaccines are the most important thing that we could do to fight this virus. Okay, it doesn't matter what you think then. And so they're evaluating now, well, who did a good job? We think Trump did bad because he was signaling to people not to do things that would have helped them. But didn't you say the vaccine's the most important? Yeah. And who signaled against the vaccine?
And there's more if you want. I got a whole list of them.
I think we're probably on the same PolitiFact article, and I see the I see the first statements that you're not reading. So in terms of what was said on August 6th, right, Biden said the way that Trump talks about the vaccine is not particularly rational. He's talking about it being ready. He's going to talk about moving it quicker than the scientists think it should.
Now, notice the shade that Destiny threw there. I see the first comments that you're not reading. Right, those were comments from other people, also in the Democrat administration, also casting shade on a vaccine. So why is it like, I think it's funny that Destiny's sort of alluding, why aren't you reading those? We could read them all if you like. You just asked about Biden specifically.
Be moved. People don't believe that it's telling the truth. Therefore, they're not at all certain that they're going to take the vaccine. And one more thing, if and when the vaccine comes, it's not likely to go through all the tests that need to be done and the trials that are needed to be done. I think that early on, and I would have to go back and dig through quotes again because I wasn't ready for coronavirus discussion, but Trump did talk a lot about expediting the vaccine. And it seemed like there was a lot of political pressure from him that he wanted to get the vaccine out as quickly as possible. If that is the case, then I could understand people being a little bit nervous about it.
You hear that? You hear what he just said? Well, if they were rushing it, I could understand people being skeptical. Right, me too. People like me and millions of other people that didn't want the vaccine. Now you understand why we were skeptical? So, just to clarify what Destiny and Democrats' positions are here. You ready? When Democrats were worried that Trump was watching the virus, that was reasonable, and you could understand people being skeptical. But when people like me and millions of other people were skeptical of the vaccine, even when we were being told it should be forced into us, then we were terrible people that were causing the spread. You see how that works? Now, how could anyone objectively watch this debate and be like, oh yeah, Destiny's doing good here? He's floundering. He has no defense of this. And again, he keeps saying, I wasn't expecting a coronavirus conversation. One, that was the first thing he said, coronavirus relief, which implied not just economics, but helping fight coronavirus and the impacts of it. So he brought it up. It was the first thing that he talked about. And secondly, why wouldn't it be something that we're willing to talk about? We were told under Trump it was the most important thing. The hundreds of thousands of deaths under coronavirus. And now when defending Joe Biden's record, when we talked during the Trump administration, that's what Destiny had to say about Trump doing bad. He's doing terrible with coronavirus. But then when it comes to talking Joe Biden's record, he's claiming he wasn't even anticipating talking about COVID. Almost like he didn't care anymore. Just like MSNBC. Remember they used to have the COVID death tracker? As soon as Biden came in office, all of a sudden it stopped. It's like they didn't care. Huh. It seems they only care when they could use it for political purposes. Now watching him, it's just embarrassing. If Destiny to save face here should have been like, yeah, I didn't know that Biden said that. That's bad. But I still think Trump was worse, but that's bad. But instead he's like, oh, I understand why people would be skeptical if they think it's being rushed.
Earlier, Kamala Harris seemed to echo as much because the quote for one of her statements was, if the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it. So it seems like there was something else there. Now, I would actually go a step farther and say any type of undermining of a vaccine is probably not a good thing. But I don't think that these were necessarily like the vaccine is bad and horrible, but probably more to do with Trump's incredibly obsessive public face of like getting it out as quickly as possible, which I think, Republicans now are worried about that, right? It's so ironic because when I try to follow down, like, well, who did these arguments end up affecting? If I take you at your word for this and I ignore anything around the quotes, and it seems like Democrats are saying like, man, the vaccine might be rushed, man, the vaccine might not be safe. It seems like it's all done for political reasons. Who are the people that are making these arguments today? It's not Democrats. It's all Republicans. So the idea that you're saying Democrats made these arguments and they were irresponsible, the only people that echo these arguments are Republicans, seem like they didn't really hit Democrats or weren't a big part of their messaging early on.
So Destiny doesn't even realize, oh yeah, he's almost there. It's Republicans, it's Trump supporters that are saying this stuff now. Yep. So why is it that you understood the Democrats doing it like Biden, but now you don't understand people doing it? I wonder.
On because all the people that are acting like this and putting these messages out are Republicans that don't want to get vaccinated.
There's very few. There are very few people in leadership in the Republican Party that are suggesting not getting vaccinated. And the other thing is, when you're the only thing you could tout that Biden would do good versus the coronavirus is his guidance, sort of his messaging. And the one issue that he and I would assume you thinks the most important when it comes to vaccine, we can see when it was politically expedient. By the way, Trump was talking about having people be available to have shots by March. That's exactly the timeline that happened. But we had all these leaders, including Biden and other medical professionals, saying it would be impossible to develop a vaccine that quick. That did more harm, even with Trump supporters that still tout to that and say, yeah, even though Trump tells me to get the vaccine, the reality is we had all these professionals saying it would be unsafe to have a brand new type of vaccine like that to come out so quick. And that's one of the big reasons I'm distrusting. Even the Democrats said it. But I'm willing to move on.
But the Democrats aren't echoing that, right? Like,
who cares? They did when it meant.
But you care because your argument is that Democrats caused harm by undermining the vaccine. Well, okay, did that actually happen? And then when I look at the effect on the public, it doesn't seem that's the case. And when I look at other statements that Biden has made, and I'm sure you see these because it sounds like we're on the same page, Biden literally says, charting a clear path of science-based vaccines free from politics. I get asked the question, if the president announced tomorrow that we have a vaccine, would you take it? And then he says, only if it was completely transparent, that other experts in the country could look at it, and only if we knew all of what went into it. Because so far, nothing he's told us has been true. That's
okay. Ask yourself now what we know in retrospect. So Biden says, I would only take the vaccine if it was completely transparent and we saw everything that went into it. Then he had attempted mandates to force people to take this. Now we're finding out we didn't know shit about the trials. We were misled in saying that it prevented transmission. It didn't. We were misled about the possible side effects. So Biden's saying in September and October, I would take the vaccine only if there was complete transparency. Then a bunch of people, once he's in office, say, we don't think there's transparency. We don't think that there's been significant testings. We haven't seen the results of Pfizer's trials and Moderna's trials. We think there are potential side effects. We don't think that it's preventing transmission. And Biden said, you're the reason this pandemic's occurring. You need to shut up. We're going to make your life hell until you're forced to take this. It's almost as if those people were following exactly what Biden was saying before he was in office. And that's actually the scummiest thing. Say what you will. It's bad. It's horrible to mandate people to take this shit. I've been one of the most foremost figures arguing against these mandates, lockdowns, everything from right at the beginning. So many Johnny-come-latelys have came along that were telling you 15 days to slow the spread. Now they're good conservatives and they're telling you, oh, the lockdowns were terrible. The mandates were terrible. I was saying it. I was criticizing Trump when he was saying Cuomo and Newsom were doing a good job with their lockdowns. That's how long I've been talking about it. But as bad as it is to advocate for mandates and things like that, what's even worse is to do so purely for political reasons, nakedly. And how can we prove that's what Biden did? Because Biden literally gave the sane rationale. Not sane, S-A-N-E. We don't know what's in these things, so I wouldn't be trustworthy. I would only take it if I knew exactly what was in it and what the trials were and what the risks were, etc. Right, exactly. That's what he said before he was president, when he thought that would harm Donald Trump. But afterwards, he did a 180. How could anyone... And then the irony is, when you ask Destiny and people, well, what did Biden do well about COVID? Well, his signal. He took it seriously. Seriously? He played politics with it. He decried the vaccine until he was in office and said, ignore everything I just said last month, and now you should be forced to take this.
Seems like a fair statement. I still think maybe you probably shouldn't say that. But like when I look at how this has affected the United States population, if we had a ton of Democrats that were refusing to get vaccinated, I would agree with you. It's like, yeah, you guys fucked up. You caused a lot of harm. But that doesn't seem to be the case. These are problems on Republican side. So I just categorically reject the idea that these are like harmful statements that Democrats made, because at the end of the day, it had almost no effect on the Democrat public.
It doesn't matter if it had effect. You think that Republicans don't listen to what the Democrats are saying? And the point is this.
No, I don't. Absolutely not.
Sure they do. Go listen to them. How many...
Wait, is your argument... I'm just curious on this one. You think that... And I'll even steal it. I won't say this is ridiculous as it sounds. You think that some parts of the reason why Republicans won't get vaccinated is because of statements Kamala Harris and Joe Biden made about the vaccine?
I think it was probably people that were going to be distrusting anyways, but they point as evidence the fact that even Democrats, when it wasn't politically expedient for them, said that there are dangers and it would be impossible to release a vaccine this fast. They point to that and say, see, even they knew. And the reality is, you can say what you want. The guidance was quite simple. We could beat around the bush. We know the truth. What changed when all this... You think all of a sudden Biden was like, and Kamala were like, oh, we have better evidence now that the election's over. Now we think that the vaccines are good. No. You know what happened was they knew that COVID was a big weakness for Trump, and so they downplayed him talking about vaccines and that being a potential thing that could help out because they knew that downplaying would help them in the election. They were willing to sacrifice people if it meant helping them in the election. That's what fucking happened. Me and you both know it. But we can move on from COVID.
1 second. I'll be right back. 1 second. Sorry about that. But yeah, everybody knows that's what happened. They saw it. The Democrats said, oh, Trump's bad on COVID, and he's putting all of his eggs in this vaccine basket, so we'll say vaccines are bad. We don't trust them. They're not going to be ready in time. Trump's a liar. Trump's wrong. And Trump was exactly right about the timing of the vaccines. Look, we also know in retrospect that Pfizer and other places intentionally delayed releasing that the vaccine was ready until after the election because they as well wanted to hurt Donald Trump. But we know that's what happened. We know it's not that Biden in September or October is like, I wouldn't trust these vaccines. And then all of a sudden he wins the election in November and he's like, oh, now I've seen more science and now I know the vaccines are good. Sorry, I was wrong when I was saying it was being rushed. It turns out it wasn't rushed. Now everyone should be forced to take it. Everybody knows what changed. And you're just lying and being duplicitous if you claim otherwise, as Destiny's trying to do here.
So I'm curious on a counterfactual then here. You think that if Trump's election would have continued on, do you think that Democrats would have been undermining the vaccine and that Republicans would be running out to get vaccinated and the Democratic leadership would say, we don't trust the vaccine?
I don't know if it would have been that severe, but yeah, they would have said that there were decisions being made medically that was being rushed through and Trump was influencing the FDA and other places like that. When in reality, we can see that it's the exact opposite. The only people that we know put pressure on the FDA was the Biden administration, which caused the resignation of two of the top people at the FDA being so furious that they were being rushed to produce it being okay for these boosters. They thought that that was Biden putting pressure on it. But if you want to keep going COVID, we can. I think that anyone here...
Which FDA resignations are you talking about?
Let me find them.
Yeah, it doesn't... Because I know there were some FDA resignations, but I thought this had to do with the types of medications that the FDA was approving, specifically over an Alzheimer's drug.
No.
To be clear, hold on real quick. It's unfair that I'm like asking you for the specific thing. I'm not trying to like source you in the middle of the debate. But I do know that there were some FDA resignations that happened because it had to do with an Alzheimer's drug, I believe, that was approved. And the problem that they had was that the Alzheimer's drug didn't show that it was treating Alzheimer's, just that it was treating an underlying condition. I think the accumulation of an amyloid plaque, but that didn't necessarily mean that it was treating Alzheimer's disease. That was my understanding of it.
In a letter,
there might have been some other resignations.
Yeah. So this is from Business Insider. It says, in a letter announcing the resignations obtained by the biotech industry publication Endpoints, Dr. Peter Marks, the director of the FDA Center for Biological Evaluation Research, praised the pair for their work during the COVID pandemic. He didn't give a reason for their departure, but sources told Endpoints and Politico that Gruber and Krauss were upset with Biden administration's booster shot plan. The administration announced last month that most people would be offered a COVID-19 booster shot about 8 months after the vaccination. One former senior FDA leader told Endpoints that Gruber and Krauss were leaving because they felt the Center for Disease Control and Prevention was making vaccine decisions that should have been left to the FDA and were upset with Marks, the leader of their division, for not insisting on the agency's oversight.
Okay, all right, gotcha.
So moving on from there, because I do want to get...
Okay, got you. So remember, Destiny said he understood Democrats, even prominent Democrats like the future president and vice president, Biden and Harris. He understood why they would be hesitant to take the vaccine because it would have been rushed under Trump. But for some reason, he can't understand how people would feel like that now. And then we have actual evidence, unlike with Trump, of people at the FDA resigning, claiming, well, we felt we were pressured by Biden's CDC. And Destiny just goes, oh, okay. Whoops. Whoopsie daisy. Notice he wasn't like, oh my God, that's terrible. Yeah, I can understand why people wouldn't be trusting it. Notice he didn't say that. Now, so far, you can see every time I've said something happened and Destiny said, wait, can I see a source for that? I don't think that's what happened. I provided the source. I was accurate. But if you would go to Destiny's comments on his video, people say the exact opposite happened. And we'll play what Destiny's reaction was after this debate. He claims that what happens is that I'm difficult to debate because constantly he'll get me on a topic and I'll lose that topic and I quickly then switch to another topic. Does that seem like what's happening? It seems the exact opposite. Destiny talked about COVID and made some bold claims about Biden's signaling, and I showed that Biden's record on COVID was terrible. And so he's like, well, I didn't expect to talk about COVID.
Get to foreign policy. I think a big thing that we could talk about would be economics, though. You kind of mentioned that you thought that the child relief, the tax credit, and things like that. The problem I have is this. Like, if you're honest, what did these child tax credits really do? Now, there are problems, and we can get into the specifics of it. But basically, if we're being as generous as possible, you used to get $2,000 for the child tax credit, or $2,000, and now that number is either, depending on the age of your child, $3,000 or $3,600. My contention is, when we look at the rate of inflation, that still leaves people in a poorer economic decision today than before when Biden took office.
And well, if you compare it to like just the past year, that's possible because things are like obviously historically fucked when it comes to pricing. But assuming that child tax credit stays forward and assuming our economy recovers and prices stabilize, which they will, I don't think you can argue that like.
Did they? Remember, this debate is November 30th, 2021. Prices will stabilize and everything. See, Biden did awesome for the economy because if you had a child, you got an extra $1,200 once. Of course, you're paying $4,000 more a year, but you got that $1,200 once. And his prediction was, the prices and stuff will eventually get better. Really? In November. That was the official line, though, remember? Inflation was transitory. And then we were hitting record highs in December and January and February and March and April and May and June and July and August. And then it started to go, not down, but it started to increase less. And the last thing I wanted to say on COVID, things have got, now what do we know? Biden, not only was I right then, Biden hasn't been any better on COVID. And everything that we're talking about here when it comes to vaccines and, the Democrats were fearful that Trump was rushing it out and we didn't have all the facts. What do we know now? Now we see every day more and more information comes out about side effects of the vaccine, about the promises that were made about the vaccines not being true, about there wasn't even the studies that were hidden from us didn't even say that it prevented transmission. And yet, when you were debating these people back then, they were saying, the reason Biden's so good is these vaccines, the vaccines, the vaccines. So now we're on to the economy. So let's keep going here.
Like a 50% increase in your child tax credit has suddenly been nullified by a 50% increase in the cost of all goods. It's like CPI hasn't increased that much. I disagree with that.
Okay, but yes, it has. Consumer price index is at a 30-year high. It's at 6 point, let me get the exact number. This is from October, which is the most recent data we have. The consumer is 6.2% October to October. That's the largest inflation surge that we've had more than 6.
Just to give you an idea of how bad these recent inflation numbers were. Now, I talked about this the other day, so I'll go through this fast, but inflation was so bad once Biden started to come in office. Think of it this way. Let's say eggs were $1 a dozen, right? If inflation goes up 10% year over year, that means next year you're paying $1.10. Now, if inflation goes up another 10%, that doesn't mean it only went up 10 cents. It's increasing 10% not from the dollar, but from the already increased $1.10. So when you hear that inflation in December was 6.5 year to year, and you hear the Biden administration celebrate that number and say, yay, inflation decreased. No, prices didn't decrease. The rate of the increase in prices slowed down, which was inevitable as I was predicting way back here in November. Yes, Biden's numbers were so bad with inflation that if they were going up 10% year to year, and the next year it fell to 6%, they would say, yay, we did it. But in reality, you're paying 16% more, which is horrible. But the thing I want to say here is I'm discussing how bad inflation is. In October 2021, it was 6.2%, and we're discussing, and no one's disagreeing how bad it is. This year, it was 6.5 from December to December. So it's actually gotten worse, even from these numbers. And on top of these numbers. And Destiny has a fundamental misunderstanding here. He's like, well, if inflation's up 6.2, but you got a 50% increase in your child tax credit, that means you got more money. Well, no, because 6.2% of $40,000 a year you're spending on bills and groceries and rent and etc., that 6.5% increase on 40,000 is much higher than a 50% increase on 2,000 in total numbers. So you might get an extra $1,000 in the child tax credit, but you're paying an extra $12,000 or $5,000 or whatever the number would be when it comes to your monthly or your yearly bills. So that is a loss. And I refuse to believe that Destiny's not smart enough to get that.
30 years. And in fact, I believe I read if that trend would continue for 7 years, that would mean every 7 years the price of everything would double. If that would continue.
If it increases at that rate for 7 years, but like we have worldwide inflation at the moment. To try to blame this on some particular thing, or to try to say that we expect that to continue at that rate, I don't know why, but I guess, well, I do know why, but people always do this when we're experiencing like these.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's ridiculous to assume it'd continue at that rate. Here we are, 14 months later, and we've not only has that rate continued, it's gotten worse.
Historically great or historically horrible economic events, people will say things like, if this happens for 5 more years, then this will happen. Or I saw people do this with, and it's unrelated to Jeff Bezos, where the Amazon stock jumped a ton like one day, and people were like, if this continues for the next year, Jeff Bezos will be worth over $100 trillion. And I was like, why are we going off of what? Like, we're in a historic period in terms of like supply chain crunch, in terms of probably some true inflation. The idea that it's going to continue at this rate for the next 7 years is a pretty big claim. I don't think any major economist is making.
Okay, so that's why I wanted to start with COVID, because again, if we're comparing Biden to the previous administration, because you could say, well, this is a crazy time. Things are different, so it's hard to look at historic things when we're talking about a pandemic that's affecting so many things. Okay, that could be true. So let's look at what the situation was before COVID hit for Trump compared to what we have for Biden if things get rosy and the pandemic goes. Even then, we could see that the economy was humming along under Trump. One of the only reasons that Trump, in fact, let's be honest, Trump was not a likable guy to the people that he needed to vote for him. Obviously, his base likes him, whatever. But he needed independents or people that were sort of in the center to vote for him. The only way he was going to get that because of his foibles personality-wise was the economy. The economy was kicking ass, right? Then COVID comes. And yet, this isn't the benefit of the doubt we give Trump. We don't say, well, a historic, pandemic, you can't really blame Trump for the economic fallout. We say, nope, the buck stops with him. So given that, you say, well, this is only inflation for a year. Yep, and that's how long Biden's been in office. He has been terrible.
To be clear, and I don't believe I said this ever in this debate, and if I've ever said this, wow, this was really stupid of me to say. I hope I've never said this. I wouldn't blame the economy during the coronavirus pandemic under Trump as being horrible. I'm not going to say like, wow, Trump really fucked up the economy there. And I'll be fair, a lot of Democrats did say stupid shit like that. Like, oh, look at this last year under Trump and the economy. Yeah, no fucking shit. It was a fucking pandemic. The economy was humming along under Trump. Like you said before, though, if we're going to say that like, well, all the shots are being delivered before Biden stepped into office, the economy was humming along before Trump stepped into office. But I mean, yeah, he relatively didn't fuck with things, and he seemed to just let shit go as it did, and the economy continued to move. The world economy continued to move, and for the most part, I think it did pretty well. Yeah, for sure, under Trump, for the most part, yeah. But my chief criticism isn't going to be the economy. My chief criticism is going to be what are the interventions that the president made into the economy. Now, when I take a look at something like the coronavirus relief, or we can get into like the infrastructure bill, and then I compare that to Trump's targeting of like tax cuts, it feels like Biden is taking a more bottom-up approach versus Trump taking a more top-down approach in terms of their stimulus or their infusion of cash into the economy, and I tend to prefer Biden's approach there to Trump's.
Right, so he prefers Biden's approach to Trump's, but the numbers don't bear out that the average person is doing well. Right, so we're talking about whether or not Biden's administration a year in has been successful or not. And basically, he hasn't been able to set any metric to show, like an objective metric, like people have more money in their pockets, or less people are dying of COVID. None of that's true, right? And so when pressed, he has to say things like, well, I like the signal that Biden's sending. Or, I think that I usually prefer a bottom-up approach. Well, how's that bottom-up approach worked? Very poorly. So just because you think, imagine that. Like, imagine if I would say, well, I think tax cuts are always the way. And then we have tax cuts and the economy declines 30% in the next 4 years. And I say, well, I still think I like tax cuts, so I think it's a success economically. Well, how would we determine whether or not it's a success? So far, the only thing you've heard of Destiny saying why Biden's record has been good 1 year into his presidency was, I think he signaled well on COVID, despite the fact the numbers show he did worse than Trump. And I liked his bottom-up approach to stimulus, despite the fact the numbers show it's not helped the economy. That's it. And it's not his fault. It's not Biden's fault. It's because of the pandemic.
Okay, that could be in a hypothetical sense of, what your ideology says is how you want to approach the economy. But the reality is, the decisions that Biden made certainly didn't stymie inflation. And all of the plans you're talking about, things like the child credit or the infrastructure bill and all of that, one of the big reasons we have inflation is the massive amount of spending. Now, let me Steelman, not all of this spending was done under Biden. Some was under Trump, right? But with the lockdown / spending that we saw, it was one of the largest transfers of wealth that we've seen from poor and working class to the wealthy. Now, I blame Republicans, Trump, but certainly you blame Joe Biden for this as well. And Biden's going on an even more insane spending spree. And what's even crazier is when you're spending trillions of dollars to the tune that Biden is, you would expect that would stave off short-term economic problems, right? Like if you made me president.
I wouldn't know.
Well, if you were president and you were like, you know what, I'm just going to spend $30 trillion today, that would probably do a lot to buttress people's bank accounts if you divvied it out in a certain way. It would cover over.
Sure, but it did. It did.
Well, and it's still bad. It did, and it's still bad. That's the point I'm making. And one of the things that people get
bad when you say that. Can you just be a little more?
What's bad? Yeah, like people's like the cost of living for people. There are people that were paycheck to paycheck are worse off now. There are people that are having to sell their houses that wouldn't have otherwise. There's people that can't afford to pay rent. This is despite the fact that they're getting all of these extra monies that caused all of this inflation. So it didn't help out in the short term, and in the long term, now we're seeing inflation. So when you say, well, people have an extra $1,600 in their pocket if they have a child, well, there's problems with that. First, that extra $1,600 probably doesn't meet the cost of inflation that we've had year over year from last October to this October. So whatever you think about Biden's plans, if we say we give him credit for the child tax credit, why wouldn't we also give him credit for the inflation and the supply crunch and the energy crunch and all of those sorts of things?
Shit, hold on, I gotta... Fuck, Brittany, why are you fucking with the camera?
That's all him.
I paid her off.
Jesus Christ. Okay. Sorry. So stepping back a little bit, like, is there inflation? Yes, there is. Is it because of a lot of stimulus? I don't think that American stimulus has caused worldwide inflation. I think that there are a lot of reasons. Well, not a lot of reasons. I mean, primarily because of things stemming from the coronavirus. There are supply chain crunches that are driving up the cost of a lot of things in the United States and across the entire world right now. The idea that sorry. So cost of living is increasing for sure. I don't know what influence the president can wield over that, especially when things related to the cost of living might be like, for instance, like cost of housing or like cost of food, stuff that would show up on the CPI. When all of this stuff is increasing worldwide, I don't know. I'm just not entirely sure what the president can do to alleviate that other than giving stimulus to people. We talk about like people living paycheck to paycheck. I don't know how we can say that they were worse off when there were people on unemployment insurance because of the boost that were getting more than they were even getting at their job. I don't know which of these people are worse off. And then in terms of people that can't afford to pay rent, rent is increasing in a lot of large cities, but this is a problem that has continued to happen probably for the last 20 years.
I mean, it's insane, right? On one hand, he's saying, I don't think that, the spending caused inflation. But then he's like, there are people making more on unemployment than they were in work. So how could you say they're worse off? Well, because the cost of everything increased. So if you make 10 cents more an hour on unemployment, first off, that should never be the case. That's the sort of mentality that leads to runaway inflation. But secondly, it's easy to see how you'd be worse off. For example, if the price of everything doubles tomorrow, but I get a $5 raise, that's not a double raise. So you could say, I don't see how you could be worse off. You're making $5 an hour more. Right, but everything costs more. So the dollar's worth less.
I don't know what the president can do to exert influence over housing prices, unless we're going to say he should take a Bernie plan or AOC plan and go like world or nationwide rent control or something. I don't see these as being areas that the president could intervene in. Now, as I said before, to start this, I'm not necessarily looking at the president for the economy. I'm looking at the interventions that they make in the economy. If Biden hadn't had done any of these things, hadn't provided any stimulus, cost of living would still be increasing. People would still be living paycheck to paycheck, and rents would still be increasing as well. These have all been trends that have been happening for decades at this point. There would still be a worldwide supply crunch. It's not like people would be better off if there was less stimulus. If anything, there would be even more problems. So in that case, I would consider that to be a positive intervention, even if inflation is happening at the moment.
Okay, but this would only make sense because you're saying, well, you can't blame Biden for the historic inflation here in the United States because it's happening worldwide, right? So if you say, but we do give credit to Biden because he can't control that inflation for having interventions. But that only works if those numbers worldwide are similar to the United States. And what you can see is from Statista.com, right? You could see inflation 2018, this is year-to-year inflation rate. 2018, 3.5%. 2019, 3.4%. This is worldwide, by the way. 2020, 3.2%. 2021, 3.5%. So it's around 3% every year. Inflation's up like 0.2% compared to year over end than what we would expect. And yet we have historic 6.8 inflation when it comes to consumer prices. So we can see that the policies that Biden's issued, the United States policies have doubled the inflation from what we're seeing on the average in the rest of the world. Also, that's just...
real quick, when we say average in the rest of the world, I don't care about the average in the rest of the world. I care about the average like the OECD, right? I don't know how much inflation like countries in Africa or in southern like South America or whatever. I don't know what type of inflation or supply chain things. Like I'm just not as. I'd be more concerned with comparisons to other OECD countries because there are countries that are ahead of us in inflation. So like Brazil and Turkey are, but then there are other countries that are like kind of comparable in terms of what the U.S. is experiencing inflation. So I'm seeing like New Zealand, Spain, Poland, Russia, South Korea, Mexico. Now the U.S. is definitely sitting on the higher point of this, but like these are all countries that are experiencing a lot of inflation as well. But then if you go down, there are some countries that are like experiencing like deflation. Argentina is a big big one: China, Indonesia, India, Costa Rica, the Netherlands, Japan. So if you're going to average all of them out, I don't really know like what that tells us. Right? I'm looking at a Pew Research article, and it says that the U.S. is the 8th highest annual inflation rate for the third quarter of 2021. But I don't think that we're like doubling the rest of the world. I think that there's a lot of different countries experiencing inflation for worldwide reasons, but they probably experience it a bit in different ways.
Well, that could be true, right? But even still, the data worldwide on the average is going to matter because there are other things that we'd be able to look at. Like, for example, we could say, well, the U.S. has high inflation and so does the UK. I don't know. I have that data in front of me, right? But even if that was the case, it could be because the UK's had very similar policies than Joe Biden, right? And it could be countries that had these more lockdown mandated oriented countries or decisions had higher inflation. That would still be reason to blame Joe Biden for the inflation. Just because Japan did it and the UK did it and Australia did it too, doesn't matter that the decisions of Joe Biden didn't directly lead to this. And that's just consumer inflation. That's just consumer inflation, right? When we look at producer inflation, it's even worse.
Right, and this is an argument that you hear people make. Well, inflation's terrible around the world. Right, because so many places around the world decided to have similar policies in the United States that were lockdown stimulus. So that's not a defense of that. Oh, well, you know, the UK and Italy and Spain and Japan, they all locked down. New Zealand, they locked down. And then they massively printed money. And look, they have inflation too. Right. That's not a defense of those policies. I was too nice, John. You're right. And we've seen that it's gotten worse. And it's absolutely amazing, right? Like, again, go back last Monday and watch the debate I had with Destiny in May of 2020 and see if he was like, well, you know, this is a global pandemic. Trump can't be held responsible. Is that the argument Democrats were making going into the election? Of course not. But as soon as their guy's at the helm, it's like, well, nothing's his fault. It's never his fault. And this is true, too, if you watch the mainstream media. Like, you know, the big joke about Buttigieg is transportation. What's the word they kept using? Like, you know, it's not his fault. It's, tragedies keep arising during the, it's not Buttigieg's fault. All these bad things keep happening to him. See, when it was the Trump administration, it was Trump is causing bad things. When it's the Biden administration, it's bad things are happening to them. And they're nobly fighting against it. What's up, Aftershock?
Right? So producer inflation is at the highest that we've seen year to year, which is 8.6% in October. That ties it for the highest we've ever seen since recorded history. Now, the reality is you could say, well, this was inevitable, but that's not what the Biden administration was telling us. They were telling us inflation, no, it's not going to be that bad. It'll be fine. It's not going to be that bad. Then they said, well, it's temporary. It's just a little bit of temporary inflation. And now they're saying, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe we need to live more like Europe. Maybe a little inflation is a good thing. And while this is occurring, we can see that large conglomerates and banks like BlackRock are buying up a bunch of real estate that the average person's no longer able to afford. So this sort of stuff, like it's incredible that like all of a sudden the buck stops here. It doesn't matter when it comes to economic policy, when we can see, regardless of how you put it, the average person in this country by far is worse off economically right now at about a year into Joe Biden's presidency than they were before it. That's the truth.
So when we look at that list of countries, like this is the reason I'm having a hard time saying like stimulus is causing this. So Japan, my understanding is Japan gave more stimulus than any other country in the world. They're experiencing deflation. So it doesn't seem like stimulus alone is explaining all of the inflation that's happening in the United States. And then we keep throwing a lot of other things here. When we say like it's not a bad thing, I don't know any Democratic leaders that are saying like, oh yeah, 5% inflation, quarter after quarter after quarter is okay. I don't think any Democratic leader wants that. But then also again, and you know we can talk about like the buck stops here or whatever. Like inflation is the purview of the central bank or the U.S. Federal Reserve. The U.S. Federal Reserve sets its targets. It's hard to tell how much inflation right now is real versus transitory, how much is going to go away. Like, it might be the case that we're experiencing massive inflation and it continues to happen, and it absolutely is a problem. It might be a case that we are super crunched right now in supply lines all over the world, and it ends up not being as much of a problem in a year or two or three. Or maybe the consumption around the world is increasing so much that it will continue to be a problem. But I don't know if I would say that, like, in a time when the...
Spoiler alert, it was a problem and continues to be a problem. And now... we're already in a recession, but now it's going to become evident now that Republicans took the House. Now they'll officially call it a recession. And people are going to continue to struggle economically. If only there were people saying, way back in March of 2020, if we have these lockdowns, we're going to suffer economic ramifications for years to come that will greatly harm the poor and working class the most. If only there were people saying, oh yeah, like me. I was saying that. And people like Destiny and Econoboy and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Cuomo and Newsom and most of the other Democrats and most of the media and most of the academics and most of the economists and most of the doctors that were working at the CDC and people like Dr. Fauci, they said, you're wrong. Lockdown saved lives. You want grandma to die. Shut up. Who cares about the economy? And some Republicans like Ian Mouse Chung was saying that. Now I have to debate these people 2-3 years later that are like, well, here's what we would do about the economy. No, what you would do about the economy is the very lockdowns that you're now saying, well, we can't blame Biden. We can't. There was a supply chain crunch. Right, caused by the policies that you advocated and that Joe Biden advocated. That's absolutely true. And also the massive spending. So it's always funny to me to watch people that endorsed lockdowns and mandates and massive spending now talking about, well, the economy.
The entire world is experiencing so much inflation. And in a time where there were countries that did more stimulus than us, like Japan, who aren't experiencing inflation, who are experiencing deflation, it just seems really hard to say the stimulus in the United States is the primary driver of inflation. I think the most I was able to find, because everybody's obviously curious, well, what's causing it? I think I read like a Wall Street Journal article that said that there might have been some small contribution there, but I don't think any economists are saying, like, oh yeah, it was the U.S. stimulus that definitely is causing inflation in the United States. Like, it still seems to be that people universally believe that it is a massive supply chain crunch, and hopefully as that resolves itself over time, we would expect to see this fall.
Okay, but again, I'm not saying it's purely the stimulus. I'm saying it is it's a conglomerate of all of the decisions that we've seen our leaders, particularly Joe Biden and the Democrats that have been in charge in all of that, House, Senate, and presidency, they own this, right? And when you say, like, it's just...
Well, look, what decisions? What do you mean by that?
Well, there's all sorts, right? Like, for example, decisions that come to energy, right? Stopping and leading guidance to lower the domestic production of fossil fuels, which required us to import more from overseas. There are decisions they made on lockdowns and things like that that help lead to the supply chain crunch. All of these things, in addition to the mass amounts of spending we're seeing, is what's going to cause inflation. And I think that if you really think about this, right, the idea that you're saying, well, look, we can't take the world average amount of inflation, right, because it could be that some countries are really high and some are really low. Well, but that seems to be a cop-out, because your entire argument that's kind of saying we don't blame the Biden administration for this inflation is, well, it's like this around the world. Well, that's not true. Now, the world is facing similar problems. They're facing a pandemic. They're facing supply chain crunches and other things like that. And yet, they don't have near, on average, the inflation we see. You cite one country, you say Japan. Okay, but maybe Japan had other policies that buttress them more against the sort of inflation that we see with the Biden administration. I don't know how you could look at the United States being so far above average in poor economic performance and say, well, we can't blame Biden for any of that, but we could give him credit for interventions, but we can't look at the rest of the world on average. It just doesn't make sense. Like, the Biden administration and the Democrats own this.
I mean, we can say that, but I don't think anybody agrees with that. I just don't think that's true. If you look at all the countries and you look at how they've doled out stimulus, now, if you want to talk about other policies that could be used to buttress against this type of inflation, then yeah, we can talk about those potential other policies. But like when we look at the amount of stimulus given in different countries, so particularly there's a thread that I'm familiar with where people are talking about like the average budget deficit to look at deficit spending during these things, and then you try to draw like a line to see how many of these countries experienced inflation. There just doesn't seem to be a strong trend there. It seems to be other things that are unrelated to the amount of stimulus or spending that countries did. Now, if you want to talk about, again, and I'll say again, if you want to talk about like other policies, that's fine. You mentioned like stopping domestic production of fossil fuels. So my understanding is, I think that they said that we're not allowed to drill on like some federally owned lands, but I don't think the majority of our fracking, the majority of the refining or the oil production in the United States happens on those lands. I don't think that was a huge like driver in I'm pretty sure we're still like the largest fossil fuel producer, I think, in the world at this point. I don't know if halting production on federal lands, if anything, if you wanted to argue, that seems like a virtue signal to me more than anything. Kind of like when you talk about doing things for federal prisons, and that's 10% of the prison population. I don't think it was a big deal. When you talk about how lockdowns are leading to local supply chain crunches, I don't know if the United States has locked down anything. People are still going to work. You know, people are masking up or getting vaccinated or whatever. But I don't know if that you
literally, if you go back last Monday, right, and this is why it's very difficult, right, to debate someone like every 7 months or 8 months, because you forget the sort of argumentation that was being made at the time, right? If you go back and you watch the review of the debate I did last Monday, right? 7 days ago. That debate was from May 1st, 2020. The debate you're watching right now that I'm reviewing is from November 30th, 2021. So over a year after. If you go back to that May 2020 debate, right in the height of COVID hysteria, Destiny is literally saying there, we have historic lockdowns that we've never seen. That's what Destiny's saying in that debate. Now, over a year later, he's saying, I don't think we ever really locked down. And this is exactly what so many left-leaning people that I debate do. Lockdowns? What lockdowns? But when you talk to them in April, May 2020, they were like, thank God we're doing these lockdowns. We had to do them, though, because Trump was so bad. That was Destiny's argument. Now we have to do these horrible lockdowns because Trump was so bad. That's what Destiny was saying. And then they just act like they never said it. By the way, Destiny did this when it came to the riots. He said in that debate, he said, writing's the other side of the coin to voting. And as long as you're not burning down private property, but you're attacking governmental institutions or public institutions that you feel have disenfranchised you, then it's okay. That's what he said. Then later he would say, I never defended violence. Now, I might be wrong about things, but I stand by what I said. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't claim I never said it.
United States is like uniquely locked down when it comes to our supply chain stuff. It seems like other countries were way more insane about, like, I say insane, but we're way more strict when it came to locking down their production related stuff.
So then let's just say hypothetically, then why do you think the United States is doing so much worse than all of these other countries when it comes to our economic standing?
Oh man, this gets really complicated because I think that the arguments between economists, and I'm not ready for this debate, the arguments between economists are how do we measure inflation? And I'm sure if you've read about this, you've heard of this. Some people will fight over whether or not the CPI versus the PPP versus other types of measures or indexes are more appropriate when it comes to measuring inflation. I don't know if going by, because the CPI is generally what people cite, consumer price index, but other people will argue that like the types of goods that are included or aren't included aren't as relevant today when that index was created. So we shouldn't even be using this as an index for inflation. That's one potential. Maybe we don't index it correctly. Maybe there are better ways to do it. A second possible example is the idea that maybe in the United States, maybe shipping things from overseas is a unique problem that the US has that makes it harder for us to get goods. I don't know if shipping overseas is necessarily as big a deal for European countries as it is for the United States. If we're getting stuff from other countries, a lot of it has to be shipped. Obviously not NAFTA or whatever the new US-Mexico-Canada agreement is called, USMCA. Obviously not from those two countries, but if we're shipping stuff from China, right? Supply line issues related to cost of fuel or like backups in harbors or stuff related to shipping things overseas is probably going to be way more relevant when it comes to backing up US production than it would be for other countries that might be able to use other modes of transportation or get more of their supply, say, from the European market, which is the largest unified market in the world. I don't know 100% if that is the case, but I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of some things that would probably be more relevant than U.S. stimulus spending, which Republicans infinitely say is a huge driver of inflation that never has been.
If spending money, increasing the money supply at the rate that we've been doing this quickly is certainly going to predictably lead to inflation. Just one thing, we can move on to the next topic. One thing, like my final point, that's just something little that I wanted to correct. I don't know if this is true. I wasn't prepared for this, so I just DuckDuckGo this. This was the first thing that comes up from the Washington Post. It says 42% of coal, 24% of crude oil, and 13% of natural gas came from public lands in 2017. So the ban on drilling and things like that from public land seems like it would have a major glut in our fossil fuel production, which would be one of the reasons that we went from a net exporter to Joe Biden, who supposedly is pushing Green New Deal stuff.
The better argument that I should be making here is that businesses, including the fossil fuel industry and energy industry, more than anything, they want predictability, right? And so businesses would rather pay more a year in taxes and have that be consistent year to year, because they could then, when they know what their expenses are going to be, they're able to then predict what investments they're going to make into certain projects in order to make money. So if you know our expense is going to be 5% tax and all this stuff, that would be more preferable than 1% tax this year and 7% the next year and then 3%, right? Because they're unable to predict it, right? When Biden says we're going to put the fossil fuel industry out of business, that's the campaign promise he ran on. And then one of his first actions is shutting down the Keystone Pipeline. It doesn't matter if that pipeline was actually going to be hugely beneficial in U.S. oil production or natural gas production. What matters is it sent the signal to the energy industry: don't plan on doing projects in the future because Biden will, at the snap of a finger, put you out of business. That's what he's promising to doing. So there is no business confidence. There's no predictability, which is why the production is going to decline. It doesn't matter then if you later say, okay, now we're begging you because the economy is doing bad and we're afraid we're going to lose the midterm, so we're begging you to produce more. Oh, you don't have time to do it? Then we'll go to OPEC and we'll beg them to produce more. The very guy who said we're going to shut down the fossil fuel industry begged OPEC before the election to stop reducing until after the election because he was afraid it would harm his side. That is unforgivable.
Type stuff, begging OPEC to increase production. We're now again reliant, in one short year. We've gone from being a net exporter, which, by the way, was one of the greatest thorns in the side of enemies we have, like Russia, the fact that we got into that market and was the biggest exporter in the world. Now we are someone that's begging foreign producers that we've had all of these problems with to increase production.
So, firstly, the prohibition was on new drilling. So that doesn't stop our current extraction of oil from places in the United States. I don't know how many new drilling sites, I'll be honest, you said that you weren't prepared for this. I'm not necessarily either. I don't know how many new drilling sites were picked out that people really wanted to go into in the United States. In terms of like whether we're like have become a net exporter or not net exporter, like just because we export a lot of fossil fuel, and I would have to read up on the specifics of this, like we still import fossil fuels as well. Like there's like refinery processes that you do where you might export certain petroleum products. You might import crude oil for different reasons, even if we are a net exporter of other petroleum products. Yeah, the idea that I don't know what the point of that is. If you're trying to say like the United States like has like ceased production of petroleum, or has our production even fallen?
I believe so. I'm not going to bullshit you though. I don't have the data in front of me. But my understanding, if the production hasn't followed, and it just seems to logically make sense. If production has remained consistent, and we went from someone that was net exporting and making a large amount of money doing it, to now we're begging OPEC to increase their production, that doesn't seem to make sense unless our production's fallen.
Or our consumption could be increased, right? Consumption of oil goods all across the entire world has increased as well. It does seem like our production has dipped for sure from 2020 onwards. But I'm not 100% sure, like, exactly why. I can't really say.
Okay. All right. So we might as well. The last thing I had domestically, we can do it real quick, is just the crisis at the border. No matter how you look at this, if you are for more immigrants or not, I think illegal immigration is bad. If you wanted those illegals to be made legal, there would be a process that Joe Biden would have been able to do that. But because of his disastrous policies and his guidance and what him and the Democrats and his administration suggested, we now have one of the big issues that he said it was a human rights abuse to have kids in cages. At one point, we had 4 times more kids in cages under the Biden administration, and we're seeing record border crossings across the southern border every month. Another undisputed disaster from the Biden administration.
So when we talk about like record numbers of kids in cages, like these are loaded terms. I don't think the problem was like kids in detainment centers. I think the issue was families being separated at the border.
And this is bullshit, right? Yeah, I see what you're saying, Aftershock. Right, and I mentioned this earlier. The nuance always, with everything under, Destin even admits this at one point. Like, for example, when the economy was tanking at the end of Trump's presidency because of the lockdowns and COVID and everything, by the way, which I blame Trump for paying lip service to the lockdowns. I think that was a huge disaster for him. The Democrats said it's all Trump's fault. The economy's all Trump's fault. And then as soon as we have a bad economy under Biden, they're like, well, he can't do anything. It's a pandemic. He has no control over it. When it come to people dying under COVID under Trump, it was all, even Biden said, hundreds of thousands of deaths on Trump's hands. Then when more people died in the same time frame under Biden, it was, well, what could he really do? There's only so much he could do. When Trump didn't pay enough lip service to the seriousness of the virus or questioned questioned mask mandates or something like that, Trump got the blame. But when Biden and the Democrats questioned vaccines, they didn't get the blame. It's always when they're in charge, the buck never stops with them. When it's their opponents, anything that happens is Hurricane Katrina's Bush's fault, right? Any disaster, any flood or anything like that under Trump. Remember that bad blizzard in New York? That's Trump's fault. He didn't get enough help. It's all Trump's fault. But when bad stuff happens under Biden or the Democrats, it's, well, what can you do? It's not their fault. Well, just like Obama. He read it in the paper. It's so funny. Democrat presidents are just hapless. Oh boy, all this bad stuff's happening. We don't have any control over it. But as soon as the Republicans are in office or someone like Trump, oh my goodness, every bad thing, it's his fault. It's his fault. And it's even more ludicrous because you can see in this debate, Destiny saying, we do give Biden credit for some things with the economy. So I like the child income tax. We give him credit for that. But we don't give him credit for the decline in the economy. We don't. So that's obviously the case, right? This argument that Destiny's making here is one of the most frustrating, right? Joe Biden himself and Kamala Harris both said it was a human rights abuse that we had these kids in cages under Trump. Then when we have 4 times more kids in cages under Biden, all of a sudden the argument changed to, well, it's the types of kids. See, and this is the argument Destiny's making here. Think of how insane this. These are people that claimed that they cared about these kids. Now, I did care about the kids, and I actually thought under Trump, although it was a no-win situation and there was no good thing to do with these kids, I thought that maybe we should have had better facilities. But I had no problem with the detention of children. Because what's the alternative? Just send the kids off on their own? Or what the Democrats want is, well, if you show up to the border with a kid, then we have to let both of you in. No, sorry. Probably what should have happened is both the kid and the adult should immediately be turned away. That's the best case scenario. If you're coming here illegally, sorry, no. Closed. Absolutely zero. But barring that, which Trump should have done, of course you're going to have to detain. It was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a left-wing circuit out of California, I believe, that issued a statement or issued a ruling that said you could no longer detain children with adults because perhaps they could be victimized. Okay, then what are you going to do? If you detain the adult, you send the child on his own way? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be as humane as possible with the children. So there was room for criticism. But the criticism was hyperbolic, including from the president and vice president. They said it was a human rights abuse. Okay, now we have 4 times more kids in cages. And Destiny and Biden and Kamala and AOC and all the Democrats in the media, they say, well, that's different. See, the problem wasn't the kids in cages. The problem was the types of kids in cages. And that's bullshit. And I said this when I debated Destiny on the trans thing. I have made my point on trans issues. I've made my point on things like biological reality. If you watched the discussion I had with Destiny surrounding trans issues, you will see that Destiny is actually worse. Because I might say, look, I don't agree with you, trans community. But what's worse than that is saying, yeah, I agree. And also, I pretend to be non-binary so that I could have armor and say things. That was Destiny's point. And I make this argument a lot, right? One of the arguments I had with people here locally on Facebook had to do with white privilege. And I had all these people, white people from my town that I formerly associated with, that were telling me about all of this white privilege that I had. And one particular conversation went something like this. I said, so you're saying that my wealth is because my ancestors, because they are white, I've accumulated more wealth? Yes. And I said, the same would be true of you as a white person? Yes. And I said, how much of your wealth do you feel is ill-gotten? And this person said, we'll call him Larry. That's not his real name. Larry said, 50%. I said, okay, as a white person, you feel 50% of all of your wealth, all of your assets, is ill-gotten. It's stolen from black people. Yes. I said, okay, give it back. Huh? Now, if you were a black person, you might think, to hell with Rob. He doesn't think that he has privilege or that his gains or his assets are ill-gotten. But you would be even more mad at the person that said, oh, and there's Larry. Larry agrees that his assets were stolen, but he's still choosing to keep them. If I think I stole from someone, I'll give it back. That's what I would do. And that's the same thing with Destiny here. The people on the left that had crocodile tears over kids in cages and then couldn't wait to be like, oh, but it's different when there's 4 times more. It wasn't the kids in cages that was the problem. It was the type. It was that they were separated from their family. These kids in cages now, 4 times more, to hell with them. They weren't separated from their family, so let them rot. Who cares? We don't care about them. No photo ops from AOC from them. No streams for Destiny talking about how bad it is for the Democrats for them. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden aren't calling it a human rights abuse when it's their administration. It's different. This time it's different. See, these kids deserve it, I guess. Even though there's 4 times more of them. And they're going to act like they're morally superior. We care about these kids and you don't. And then as soon as they win an election, huh? What kids? Huh? What? What? No, these kids are different. We're not worried about them. You tell me who cares more. That's the way these virtue signalers always are. So Destiny's wrong. The argument wasn't, oh, it was never about the kids in cages. It was about just separating them from their families. Bullshit.
Thing that was a problem. Now, there were times in the past where people were being critical of Biden, say, oh, look, like you've got more families, you've got more children in different detainment centers and whatnot. But that was a fundamentally different issue than with the problem under Trump that people complained about, where families were being separated at the border and we're essentially, that was the huge problem there. In terms of,
I just real quick, I fundamentally disagree. I do think that they were making that second issue, saying that the separating of families was uniquely bad. Again, it's hard to blame Trump for that because it had to do with the decision that came out of the most liberal district But regardless, they were obviously also pissed about the fact that there were kids in cages. And the comments of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden talking about kids in cages being a human rights abuse would never happen under our administration. I'm sorry, I don't buy, oh, we're talking about different types of kids. Fuck these kids. 4 times more in cages? Oh, well, screw them. We were talking about different types of kids. No. They said kids being detained was horrible, and then the amount that were detained under Biden increased fourfold.
Yeah. I mean, like, if the only critique is that, like, kids in I don't know what kids in cages mean. Like, are we talking about, like, just children being detained? Because I mean, like, you have to detain people that are trying to cross the border. I don't know how I'm supposed to argue that that's a failure of the Biden administration. Should they just be let in? Should they just be turned around? Or I mean, like, obviously, you have to detain people that are trying to enter the country. I mean, that's going to be an unavoidable process of managing the border. I don't know if I would see this as a giant failure on the Biden administration.
But we shouldn't use me and your stand. I agree with you, right?
Destiny just defended Donald Trump. Little does he know. Exactly. Right. That was the argument under Trump. But you weren't making it then, were you? And the Democrats weren't making it. Well, what are you supposed to do? Just let him in. Of course you have to detain them. They said Trump was an inhuman monster. It's not assuming they're arguing in good faith, Aftershock. I'm just pointing out for the audience. They don't give a shit. They never cared about the kids in cages. They didn't care. It was just a tool to blame Trump for something. And it's sad, right? Like, let me give you an example. I have a family member, extended family, so not like my brother or sister or something like that. Cousin, second cousin, I don't know exactly which. I have a lot of second cousins because you have to understand, my dad had 8 sisters and a brother, and so he was the second youngest. So by the time he had me, like, I had cousins that were having kids, you know, because my dad's more than 20 years younger than some of his siblings. So I sometimes get confused, cousins and second cousins. My cousin's kids that's my age would be my second cousins, but they always seemed like cousins to me. So it was someone like that, and this particular cousin was dating a guy who failed to pay child support for a previous relationship. And it was a years thing. It went for years and years and years. And this guy was also getting busted for things like DUIs and drug charges and things like that. It's not a good person. And eventually, they came to the house with a warrant and they arrested this guy. And my cousin or second cousin took her phone out and recorded them handcuffing her boyfriend and taking him to the car. And her kids were crying. And she's saying, they're ripping a parent away from their children. This is inhumane. It's monstrous. And as a clip, that's sad. It sucks. You can't help but pour in your heartstrings to see these kids crying that their dad or their stepdad is being taken away in handcuffs. But what's the alternative? We just say, oh, well, you can't charge anyone with a crime that has children. Can't do that. And if they don't turn themselves in or whatever, you can't go to their house and pick them up. You can't do that. Of course, the public relations image of, look at this kid crying, this is horrible. But we as adults have to see past that and say, you're right, that is terrible. But why did you put those kids, you're the people that put those kids in that position. That's what they were doing with the kids in cages in the photo ops. It was a terrible situation that there wasn't a good answer. But they knew that most of it, remember, I tell you all the time, what's the double standard mean? Why are they doing a double standard? Why are they hypocrites? It shows they don't care. They didn't care about kids in cages, but they knew you did. And by you, I mean the average person. The average person sees a kid in cage and you're like, that sucks. What can we do? That's how I feel. They didn't give a shit. Destiny didn't care. Biden didn't care. Kamala Harris didn't care. The Democrats didn't care. AOC didn't care. And how do I know? Because when there was 4 times more kids in cages when it was their team, they didn't have shit to say. They never cared. Period. And so when Destiny's here saying, well, what are you supposed to do? You got to detain them somehow. You can't just... Right. That was the argument you should have been making when Trump was in office. But you didn't give a shit.
The correct answer when people were criticizing Trump with kids in cages is it's very complicated. So the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said you can't detain children with adults, right? Because obviously bad things could happen. And so the implication was, well, what do you do? Just leave the kids go themselves? If a dad comes across the border with a child and you have to detain the father, what are you going to do? Send the child himself? Or are you just not going to detain anyone that comes with the kid? Well, that doesn't seem feasible. So you're thinking through this rationally. That was the answer. But it's not my standard or your standard that matters. It's Biden's standard. It's Kamala Harris's standard. They said it was a human rights abuse and it wouldn't be done under him. And the Democrats and the media went fucking nuts on this issue. They said Trump was an inhuman monster because these kids were caged. And then all of a sudden, once it's the Biden administration and it turns off, signaling to the rest of the world, yeah, if you come here, it's not a crime to cross illegally and you'll get a bunch of free shit. Well, that led to people sending their kids by themselves. What are you going to do? Leave the kids in? No, they have to be detained. But these people, including Biden and Harris, said that it was a human rights abuse. And so it just goes to show that not only one, is this a crisis and just the sheer amount of people that are crossing, but second, the same people that virtue signaled about being so upset about kids in cages, they never gave a shit. They didn't care at all. They just saw it as a political issue to hammer Trump with. They didn't care about the kids.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to necessarily disagree with that in terms of like the average messaging on almost everything related to immigration tends to be really stupid. I don't disagree with you there, but I mean, like, there were Democrats critical of Biden's treatment of this, even post Biden getting into office. I remember that people were complaining about certain centers that children were being held in and that the standards went up to par on them. But even when you looked into those, I'm pretty sure that the centers that the children were moved to were ran by different departments that had more humane conditions than some of what was photographed at the border under Trump. Now, I mean, we can argue that maybe this isn't necessarily Trump's fault, or maybe they...
That's bullshit. Remember, like, how could you say that? Remember, there was a total gag put on the press that they weren't allowed to go into these facilities. And then the Democrats and people like Biden are like, well, the facilities they got moved to were better. Well, the small amount of photos we saw showed that they were massively overcrowded and kids were laying shoulder to shoulder on the floor. Remember when it was Trump? Democrats insisted that they and camera crews be allowed to go through these facilities so they could have their photo ops. But when it was Biden, it was, no one's allowed in these places. Right, Mojo, I'm not for open borders. I'm sorry, there's a lot of problems with that. I know that you don't care about the people that are sexually assaulted, have interactions with drug mules, coyotes, and things like that. You don't care. You say, the rest of the world, come on in. If you want to come in, you're a legal citizen. I know you don't care the abuses that occur to them and that you're a fundamentally unserious person that thinks that we could just have a forever open border, but it's stupid. But I do appreciate people like you, Mojo, so we can see that that's really the game. That's really what the Democrats mean. They really mean that. They are open borders. They lie to you, but that's what they're really saying. Just let anyone who comes here be legal. End of discussion. Right. So I'm glad that you're here to show that this is what really is going on. At least you're honest about it. But yeah, anyone with half a brain sees what a terrible policy that would be.
Had good reason to separate, like children from their families. I have a hard time believing this because I'm pretty sure the federal government right now is paying restitution to those families that were separated. So it seems hard to believe that it's still happening and they're paying restitution at the same time. I guess maybe that's possible. It doesn't seem very likely to me that is happening. And then in terms of there being more border crossings, I mean, historically, Democrats have been a bit nicer when it comes to immigration. And I'm pretty sure historically there are more people that are trying to cross the border under Democrats. I think if you look at Democrat versus Republican candidate or presidencies, and then you look at the border crossings, they always tend to increase under Democratic presidents. It's just something that happens. But
yeah, but I mean, again, even if it happens historically, that's not a reason to say that this is a success for Biden. And again, I understand. There are issues that me and Destiny are arguing about, like how much immigration do we want? We're not going to get into that debate. The point I'm trying to make, even if you think we should have more immigration, you should prefer legal immigration. And Biden would have had the opportunity, as we've seen with Obama, to make a lot of executive decisions that would allow certain classifieds of people to be legal immigrants. But instead, we have record illegal immigration that's occurring.
So in this case, okay, sorry, I've lost the plot, but now I understand. I wouldn't argue that Biden has been successful in immigration. It wasn't the point that I originally brought up. But on the flip side, I don't know if I would argue that Biden has been unsuccessful in immigration. So you bring up a really good point that if he wanted to, Biden could have flexed some executive authority in order to help people that were immigrants. So I think that he's tried to do that by rescinding some of what was done to DACA, or at the very least, it's being challenged in the courts. Trump's attempted of revoking some of the protected status to the DACA people. But I mean, something that we saw between Obama and Trump is Obama seemed to be frustrated that he couldn't get, I forget the name of the Immigration Act passed in Congress. So he started to do some things via executive authority, and Trump rolled on and he tried to undo those things via executive authority. I know that a lot of Democrats are attacking Biden for his mentality of working together, but I actually greatly approve of Biden attempting to get more comprehensive legislation passed through Congress rather than trying to do everything via executive order, because that just doesn't work out. Legislation is much harder to undo. We saw that under the Trump administration. Getting rid of the ACA was unsuccessful versus just attacking executive orders with new presidents. So in terms of like, you're saying Biden has the authority to do a bunch of stuff via executive order. Yeah, sure, he could, but why would you do that when your whole point as president is saying like, here, I'm here to work together. I'm trying to pass stuff in a bipartisan manner, and I don't want to just flex a bunch of executive authority to be undone with the next president. I think that's a good thing.
don't disagree with you on that. In that we should, I think the executive power, both with Trump, with Biden, with Bush, all of them, we have way too much executive power, and I agree that that's legislative branches are there to legislate. However, the point that I'm trying to make here is, regardless, the decisions that Biden has made has led to record illegal immigration crossings that are occurring, and that's a disaster, and it's leading to real harms like sex trafficking, fentanyl crossing the border, all sorts of things that are benefiting the cartel, including 4 times more kids in cages. And I'm just trying to make the point that even if you're on the left, because certainly I don't have to sell it to my audience, I don't have to sell it to conservatives. They're like, yeah, that fucking sucks. But I'm making the point that even on the left, it sucks. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask you this question. I have to run and let Melina real quick, so I'm going to give you a chance to research it real quick. So what decision did Biden make or his administration make that led to like increased illegal border crossings? Was this actually like a Biden decision, or is it just more people tend to do this when there's a Democratic president in office? And then I'll be right back.
I'll answer when he comes back. Meanwhile, I could grandstand. Aren't I kicking ass? I'm doing better than that guy that was dressed as corn did last night.
I can't wait to watch this on 2 times speed. I'm definitely going to do that.
I can go faster if you want. So I could, like, this is the answer I'm going to give. The problem is that what we see is that there were a bunch of people like Biden and Kamala Harris and even every Democrat that was on the stage that raised their hand and said they didn't think it should be a crime to cross illegally. When you do that, and in addition, you said that we should give free education and healthcare to these people, of course you're going to send the signal to the rest of the world that they're going to come to get all these things. So I can't talk fast. I can talk faster if I want. It has to do with...
So, again, the irony is, when it came to COVID, Destiny was like, well, Joe Biden signaled. That's what was important. He signaled. But then when it comes to immigration, all of a sudden that signal doesn't matter. Joe Biden and every Democrat on the debate stage refused to raise their hand when they said crossing the border illegally should be a criminal punishment. Refused to. Over and over, they interview people that are illegally crossing, and they're like, we know Biden's administration will let us in. Right, Mojo, I know that you're a nobody and no one's listening to you. What I'm saying is that so many Democrats are duplicitous. What they really want is open borders. And we could see people like you come out and say, I applaud you for being honest to say it. I'm not saying that people are listening to you. I'm saying that that is the truth, that there are many Democrats that do the same thing. They won't say it outright, but that's what they really mean. I understand that you're grandstanding on, I would never say if Rob says something, that's what all Republicans think. I'm not saying because you said it, Democrats are following you. I'm saying that many Democrats believe, yes, they do want open borders just like you do. You semantically say it's not open borders, but when you say, hey, stop in here, as long as you check in at this booth, now you're all legal citizens, that's open borders. So, done responding to you, Mojo. So now, I'm probably going to end it here before we get to foreign policy. I'll leave Destiny, come back, and then we still got an hour. We still got damn near 2 hours to go, so I'll do the rest of this tomorrow. But let's go a little further. It's policy debate in college. You have to talk really fast. It's fucking stupid. It ruined me for life because it makes me talk fast now.
I thought it was like panels that ruin you because you're trying to get in as much as you can while you have your floor.
That's true too. But no, I think it's going to get. Look, here's the thing. I like debating someone like Destiny because even though I think I'm confident in all my positions, like I'm just setting up in these positions. I think when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to fuel and supply crisis, I think Biden's been a disaster. But I like debating someone that's actually intelligent and can push back. So all right, okay, I can answer if you like. It doesn't have to do. So like you should know the answer to this because you said that on COVID, the important thing is guidance and things like that. And although I have questions on how much that would be true when we're talking about the specific decisions under COVID, certainly a lot of that is the signal to people that are illegally crossing. So, for example, when we saw every Democrat on the debate stage, when they were asked, raise your hand if you think crossing the border should be a criminal offense if you do so illegally, and no one raised their hand. And then we saw people like Biden and a bunch of other Democrats, almost all of them, say, we should give health care to these people. We should give education opportunities to these people. It's no surprise when they ask these caravans that are coming, why are you coming? They say, Biden, we thought Trump would send us back and we think Biden will take us in. And so even if he has the policy to say, no, we can't take you in, he signaled to the rest of the world, along with the Democratic Party, that we would be willing to accept illegals. We don't think it's a crime. You'll still be allowed to come in. You'll still be given all these benefits. And would me or you blame people for taking that deal? Of course not. So it was the guidance that Biden and the Democratic Party offered. That's why there is historic numbers of people crossing the border.
Okay. And I think I said as much earlier when I said that under Democratic presidents, there tends to be more, my understanding is there tends to be more border crossings, or at least attempted border crossings that happen. But it seems like you have to concede that if the messaging from the administration is going to cause very real on-the-ground things to happen insofar as illegal border crossings are concerned.
By the way, I'm watching you too, Rumble chat. Thank you so much. But yeah, that person I was talking to was on YouTube, so sorry.
We must have to make the same concession for Republican leadership and messaging during the coronavirus.
Well, but the difference is this, right? Think about it this way. There are ideas of what the messaging can do when it comes to the people we're talking about. So you're right that the leadership and the messaging when it comes to individual wearing a mask or individual choosing to get a vaccine, yes, that messaging and stuff could matter. I argue that the Democrats weren't any better on that until they found it to be politically expedient once they won the election. But nonetheless, I will concede that on that particular issue, you could be right. However, unlike with this illegal immigration stuff with COVID, there are actual policies that could have been done through Biden using executive privilege, or it could have been through him using his position as the executive to force sort of compromises and things like that legislatively, such as increased testing, increased mononucleotides, other things like that would have been beneficial instead of just saying, we're going with mandates and the vaccine. When it comes to illegal immigration, what we're talking about is why are these people coming? Now, one of the things, and I'm sure you know this, Destiny, that progressives complain about is Biden's sending a lot of people back. He's sending a lot of people back. Well, the best thing to do would be to stop the incentive for people to come in the first place. And that's the problem. The messaging led to that incentive, and those people are coming, and then it's a horrible situation. Like, I don't want these people to have a shitty time either. But what do you do? Do you just let everyone in? Do you detain everyone? Do you send everyone back? You've made the decision impossible because of the signaling that you did to the rest of the world. That's what Biden did, and that's what the Democrats did when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree, but I mean, all they can do is enforce the rules at the border, turn it back, or catch them if they try to cross illegally, and then I guess hopefully in the future try to do some sort of comprehensive immigration reform. But I mean, like right now, that's obviously not the main ticket on the agenda. I don't know if I would expect Democrats to change their entire messaging because of because of a substantial increase in illegal border crossings, when it's just not something that can be part of their legislative agenda right now because they don't have the votes for it or they don't have the political capital for it.
Okay, I'm cool with
like when I'm talking about like wins or losses of the current administration. I don't think I'm considering like immigration here. This has like been untouched at this point. But again, we're like year one into the presidency.
But again, I'm just saying it's a disaster. Like all the things we've talked about, like we could say it's not his fault.
Disaster. Like,
yeah.
What do we mean by disaster? Like,
it's way worse. It's way worse than it has been in a long, long time.
Okay. I mean, there are more attempted like crossings and turned back, but yeah. I mean, I guess I could see that.
I mean, what do I mean by disaster? Historically high numbers of illegal immigrants coming to the country. That's what I mean by disaster. What do you mean? What do I mean? I mean, it's so dumb. What do you mean disaster? Well, it's the worst it's ever been. Oh, okay.
I don't think that it's like a big thing in the average American mind. I don't think it's like a huge detriment to the country. It's definitely I'm pretty sure it's worse than it was under Trump. But yeah, okay. Okay.
And that's the point I'm trying to make. Then all the things we've talked about, things are worse now than they were before Biden took office. And you're like, well, we can't really blame Biden for all of that. But again, I guess we'll leave it to people to decide. I'm cool with moving on to foreign policy if you want. Talk about Afghanistan.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
All right. So this is where we're going to end it for tonight. And we'll pick up tomorrow. We'll do the same thing tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. So I'll give some comments here. A couple things to say. One, stylistically. Now, be honest, right? Was it not refreshing that the moderator was basically unnecessary? I mean, you want a moderator just in case, but how many times did the moderator have to speak up? They were almost irrelevant. There were two of them. They were almost irrelevant. And that's one of the reasons that I really enjoyed this debate. And there's been a handful of other debates like that. When you get two people that are interested in hearing each other, I think that, now it's always good to have a moderator because it's a fail-safe. But no, I thought that this went really well. Secondly, was there one issue that Destiny even remotely did well on when it came? That was domestic politics. The debate was, is Biden's administration good? And basically Destiny said, I'm pleasantly surprised. He's outperformed my expectations. And my take was, Biden's doing very bad. Swirly says Britney's unnecessary period. Perhaps true. Now remember, I cited three things I would look at, scandals and things like that, foreign policy and domestic policy. And domestic policy is what this portion of the debate that we went over today covered. The economy, COVID, the border. Those are the three areas. Destiny said that he wanted to talk about foreign policy. Okay, we'll get to that tomorrow. Right? And then he wanted to talk about COVID reaction, which we talked about there. And he wanted to talk about the infrastructure bill, economics. So basically, economics in reaction to COVID. I know I'm biased, right? I get that. But Destiny got crushed there, didn't he? Was it even close? How could you come away from that section and be like, yeah, I think a compelling case has been made that Biden's doing a good job? It was not even close. Wasn't close. Does anyone disagree? Yeah, see you, Whaley. You said Destiny got me. Pandering and signaling are the same thing. Okay. Well, of course it's not over yet. That's 1/3 of the things we were talking about. I don't know what the point you were making with pandering and signaling being the same thing. No, Destiny and me probably won't have this debate again because he doesn't want to debate me. Why would he? Why would he want to debate me? We'll get to foreign policy. I don't think he does any better on it. We spend most of the time on foreign policy talking about Afghanistan. How'd that turn out? But you wouldn't know it if you look to a lot of people, that follow Destiny. Now, granted, we still have a long way to go. And actually, it's not as long as I think, because I think some of this video is me by myself at the end. But I want you to... This is what Destiny says, and what his audience has said, because he says it. Right? This is how Destiny ends the debate once we leave. Ready? This is what he says.
The biggest thing on Rob is just being aware of. It's always the same way. You have to be aware of so many things, and if you're not aware of them all, it's so easy to miss things because he always interjects 3 or 4 things and I think I caught most of them because I've been aware of so many of the talking points. So fuck, it is so hard to keep track of all the different things. But I will say, regardless of everything, my conversation with Rob, at the very least, I feel like it gets my brain moving more than some of the past horrible fucking conversations I've had. Jesus fucking Christ. I hate to say it, but goddamn, it felt so much better to argue with him versus all the insanely stupid fucking conversations I've had recently. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. One thing that Rob is really good at rhetorically, and you can watch this, and for me to counter it, I have to be kind of an asshole. Something Rob is so good at doing, okay? I don't know if you noticed in the debates, is Rob can make a point that's actually just completely factually incorrect, and then I can actually corner him on it, and he will drop it very subtly and then move on very quickly so that it hasn't actually looked like he's lost any ground. He is really, really, really good at doing that. There was a couple times where I saw him do it, and I almost thought about saying hold on, I want you to admit that you were wrong here. The FBI didn't actually do anything wrong. But he's so good at kind of summarizing his argument and getting rid of the more extreme parts and then quickly moving to the next point so that it doesn't actually look like he was wrong about anything he said, regardless, right? I'm not trying to insult legally in person. But yeah, he's really, really, really good at doing that, which is interesting. It's fun to find ways to... Something that's been fun while I'm navigating this conversation is to try to find ways to maneuver around different types of arguments. I've been a lot more mindful of it. Like with that corn guy, I think I did really well there.
Now, the only reason I play that isn't that exactly what you saw in the first section with Destiny? He would say something, right? Then I would show evidence, and then he would move away from it. What point did I say immediately, in that first section on domestic policy, that I ended up, oh, okay, I was wrong about that and move away from? Now, the only thing I can think of, right, is what he's talking about when he says the FBI. We later talk about the FBI being directed to look at parents that were at complaining about CRT at schools, right? That's what he's referencing. We'll see that tomorrow. And then there's a portion later where I mention that Kamala Harris said she believed the multiple accusers that accused Biden of sexual assault or sexual harassment. And Destiny is able to provide a link from one of those accusers saying, despite the fact that he touched me in a sexual nature against my will, I don't consider that sexual assault or sexual harassment. And that's Destiny's big gotcha. And my point's like, okay, regardless of what she says, what she defines legally is sexual harassment or sexual assault, but whatever, she doesn't feel like it. And that's where Destiny gets this claim from, I guess. Right, when Destiny was like, I don't remember Biden saying vaccines. He wouldn't trust the vaccine. Then I provided an example. And he said, it's the FDA people, they left because of Alzheimer's drug. Then I provided an example. I didn't move away from any positions here. None. I didn't even... so again, we'll judge for yourself tomorrow, but watching that debate, I don't even understand, what, if I'm steelmanning Destiny's position, right? What did he say that's yeah, Biden's doing well? He said in his overview, he liked the infrastructure bill, which we talk about that a little later in the debate. And he said, he liked that Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, which granted, we didn't get to that. But in his opening, he said he liked the child tax credit, which we talked about, and it was just well, okay. I think it was good, but economically, things are bad, but it's not Biden's fault. Basically, all he said the entire time was, yeah, okay, things don't look good, but it's not Biden's fault. If that's the best you have for this guy has a good presidency is, well, okay, things aren't looking good, but it's not his fault. I would say then, that's not a good president. I would say, look, okay, it's not good, but I think it would be worse if it was the other side. Yeah, I agree, Ian. I don't know if they, and I just think that perceptually, it didn't look good for Destiny there. I don't think it did. Now, having said that, I still thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, would like to talk to Destiny again. Absolutely. But this is the type of debate why people, the bigger left-wing streamers, don't want to debate me. And Destiny admits it there. It's difficult to debate me because you have to know a lot about a lot of things, which is true. But that's not exclusively true. We could have spent 5 hours just on COVID. How do you think that was going for him? One of the things that was interesting about this debate, and then I'll wrap up here, is most of the time, when you read the comment section of the person you're debating, which, yeah, I'm arrogant, I do that, probably not the best advice to do, because there's going to be a healthy portion of people that are just like, F this guy, he's a fat piece of shit, I can't stand his voice, he's terrible, he's smooth brain, he's a conspiracy theorist, he's a moron, Destiny crushed him, blah, 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 everything he said was a lie. But you expect that. But what I was pleasantly surprised with, and I mentioned this on Sitch and Adams' show, probably a good 20 to 30% of the comments on Destiny's channel was, wow, Rob did really well. And that's originally why I got into debating people like that. Aftershock says a lot. Don't assume these people are arguing in good faith. Probably true. But probably 50 to 100,000 people saw that debate. And almost all of them were Destiny fans. How many of them were like, wow, that guy did really good? How many of them thought about things in a different way? And I'm not saying I'm going to change people's minds to understand how terrible Biden or the Democrats is overnight through one debate. But that's how you lay the groundwork. And I think regardless of if you think I won this debate or lost this debate, and I am arrogant, I want to do well. I'm arguing things I believe in, I really am, but I want to do well. I want in my mind to think, yeah, I did better in that debate. But even beyond that, I think I came through as as articulate, as sane, as a sensible person making good arguments. And I think that a lot of his audience understood that. And a lot of his audience was like, you should talk to Rob more often, which I would love to do. One, because that would be great for me because it's a bigger audience. I'm not going to bullshit you. But second, because I like those conversations. It's the same reason I talk to Dylan Burns and Pisco a lot. I love arguing with people. And those are people that even if I disagree, and even if I think they're bad faith on many issues, at least they make me think about things. They make me have to be good at defending my positions, as opposed to so many of these whack jobs that I debate that are absolutely pathetic, like Poly People or No Comment Chick or Demon Mama or... That's why I reach out to someone like Destiny. That's why I reach out to Pisco or Dylan Burns. Even I'm really important when I reached out to him. Those are people that I'm at least having a conversation with that's not just degrading immediately into you're a transphobe or it's not. Or Sonsel is another person I like talking to. But Destiny don't want to talk to me. Why would he? He knows what happened in this debate. Deep down, he knows. Want to know how I know he knows? You want to hear what Destiny's closing argument is? We'll spoil it here. All right? This is how Destiny edited. This is his closing argument. He gets to speak last. Now you're going to have to take my word for it. You'll see tomorrow. But none of this is relevant whatsoever to our debate. But one common trick in a debate is, if you're not doing so well, change the topic, particularly if you get to speak last. So here we go.
I know why people are as left as they are now. Like, it's not that crazy, you know? We don't hear this rhetoric anymore because we moved into kind of a different era, but Jesus Christ, I remember growing up, when I was a staunch Republican, my response to every single fucking thing a Democrat said was, you hate this country. You're not patriotic. You hate the country. You hate the troops. You don't support Iraq. You don't support Afghanistan because you fucking hate the troops. You want our fucking military to die. You want all these people, right? This is the rhetoric that Republicans have been giving for the past, decade or 2 decades, Jesus Christ, in terms of every single possible Democratic argument. Anytime you say, like, maybe we could have more minimum wage. Oh, maybe we can do, maybe more for education. Oh, you want to be like Europe because you fucking hate America, right? Well, Jesus Christ, if you tell a group of people for long enough they hate the country, maybe some of them will start to hate the country. If loving America means supporting massive amounts of war, supporting the incarceration of people for smoking marijuana, means not approving of things like gay marriage or any other socially left issue, it doesn't surprise me that now we've got a generation of people that are on the left that, maybe they do say America, because you've told them for their entire lives that advocating for things like an increase in the minimum wage means you're anti-patriotic, or saying maybe we shouldn't go to war with all these countries in the Middle East. Oh yeah, well you hate the United States. Okay, well I guess I do. I empathize with you a lot because I've been on both sides of it, both in what I believe in and in what I fight against. That rhetoric that is extreme on one side can drive people to the other direction, but it feels like sometimes we have the memory of goldfishes politically, that we remember for the past 2 or 3 years that Democrats, or at least people on the internet, and even some Democrats will call every motherfucker that disagrees with them, you're racist, you're racist. What's that? You don't believe that we should do this? You're fucking racist. That's shitty when Democrats say it. It's horrible and it does drive people for the right. But goddamn, before that...
Right. What? That has literally nothing to do with the debate. But it's a speech, I guess. And his audience, yeah, okay. All right. So, all right, anyways, let's see where we... Oh, shoot. I probably screwed the pooch. Where were we? I didn't write down the time.
He looks a lot like General Mike.
Oh, boy. 1 second.
Fucking nuts on this issue. They said Trump was like inhuman, including 4 times more kids in cages. And
border crossings, or at least attempted border crossings, so that half begins to increase their attacks. Then what? Now,
and he lied to the American people, and he lied to the world community, and didn't even stay in contact with.
Okay. I mean, there are more attempted crossings and turned back, but I guess I could see that. I don't think that it's a big thing in the average American mind. I don't think it's a huge detriment to the country. It's definitely I'm pretty sure it's worse than it was under Trump. But yeah, okay. Okay.
And that's the point I'm trying to make. Then all the things we've talked about, things are worse now than they were before Biden took office. And you're like, well, we can't really blame Biden for all of that. But again, I guess we'll leave it to people to decide. I'm cool with moving on to foreign policy if you want.
All right, 1:13:45. That's where we'll start tomorrow. So let me write that down. 1, 13, 45. I hope you all enjoy this. I enjoy going back and looking through these. They're not all going to be Destiny, and next week I'll come up with something different. But I think it's important to go back and look at how these things, if they're not going to debate me on it again, it's interesting to go back and see how our comments have held up. So, yeah, I'm very happy with how this debate went and how things, I think that I've been proven out with when it comes to the border, when it comes to the economy, and when it comes to COVID. Everything I said has aged very well. Borders worse than it was then. The economy's worse than it was then. COVID, now we're finding out all sorts of information about the vaccine and things like that. We're seeing how terrible the lockdowns were. So, yeah, I'm happy. I hope you all enjoy this kind of content. And I hope it gets you excited like it gets me excited to be able to debate people in the future. So this Friday on Drunken Debates, I have no idea who the right-wingers will be. I think maybe Aircraft Sparky, me, and to be determined. On the left, I believe we have Chud Logic, Joe Lewis, and Prime K's. So it's that ought to be a good one. I have to say, to his credit, I was pleasantly surprised with Joe Lewis last week. I thought he did quite well. And I don't mean quite well in that I agreed with his points. I thought he did quite well in that a lot of interactions I've had with him is just him screaming that I'm a racist. None of that happened. I thought that it went well. So, I don't know what the topics will be, but, yeah, it should be good. Those aren't the panelists, only some. What do you mean? Some of those people aren't going to be there? You let me. Aftershock's the producer, so he'll be able to tell us more. Who do we have confirmed? Me, Sparky. Oh, KOE. Yeah, he's cool. Prime K's Joe Lewis. Oh, and Stardust. Well, that will be fantastic. Yeah, we don't want many more than 6 people, so that's good for me. Yeah. That's a panel I could dominate. It'll be good times. So, yeah, Aftershock, I can't even see that person's comments. I don't care. So, all right, I'm going to head out. I do thank all of you. I really do. I really appreciate it. We're going to grow as a community. I know we will. I know there's some growing pains trying to get off Twitch and YouTube. I understand that. So the numbers aren't always going to be as great. But we got a lot coming up. I know Aftershock's really committed to helping me as a producer and helping me out, if I need people to come on the show, including himself. So we're going to start being consistent with our times. Like I said, the plan is I'll be streaming back here tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Wednesday will be my normal show. Thursdays, I think I'm going to take off. Friday, Drunken Debates. And then I'm going to try to stream, unless I have family stuff, Saturdays during the day. Some shows and things like that. So, yeah, I can't wait to be back tomorrow. I hope you all enjoyed yourself tonight. We're not on Twitch, so I'm not worried about rating anyone. But I had a lot of fun. Can't wait to see you tomorrow at 9 p.m. So we'll see you all then. Thank you. Oh, and if you like this, obviously click the thumbs up button if you're on YouTube or Rumble. I would really appreciate that. Consider sharing this video to a friend or the original debate. Let me put a link to the original debate if you'd like that. That's probably something I should have done early. But when you got left-wing people online saying, oh, the left-wing people, they debate so much better. Show them this debate. Show them any of the debates I'm in, pretty much. I think I've been phenomenal, my track record. I don't think I've won every point on every debate, but I think I've had a damn good showing on almost everyone. And that's why we're looking back, part of the reason. So, all right, thank you all so much. We'll see you tomorrow around 9 p.m. Eastern. As always, have a good one.